Welcome to the Weekend Blitz with Phillip Jordan. What were the biggest headlines of the week? What are the big weekend matchups? Writer and producer Phillip Jordan and his guests break it all down over the next 2 hours. Now, grab the beverage of your choice and let's kick this show off.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the debut episode of the Weekend Blitz. I am your host, Phillip Jordan, in-studio host and producer for Dolphins Football on 96.9 The Legend, and also writer for Last Word on college football. I'm really excited, happy you are here, checking out the maiden voyage of this brand new show. Come to you every Saturday morning on YouTube from 8 a.m. Central to 10 or a little after Central. But glad you're here. Of course, podcast listeners, the show goes up on Apple, Spotify, all the favorite podcast platforms. You can check that out as well. And please, if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. Would really be appreciated. On the reviews, I do read them. I will read them on a future edition. We won't do it here, but we will be doing some mailbag and some questions from you. So if you want to ask the show, and that's going to be a big part of the show down the road. Not today, not the first episode, but it will be a big thing here on the show. And we're stacked. Episode 1, the show is stacked. 4 great guests. I'm really excited for you to hear these guys or see these guys that I'm going to be talking to today on episode 1. Jeff Culhane, he is the voice of the Florida State Seminoles. He will be up first. I will talk to him about broadcasting career, his journey, and we'll also get into last year with the Florida State Seminoles and this year, preview this year's team. Then we'll get into the ACC and the Pac-12 with Last Word on College Football managing editor Tony Siracusa. When originally I asked Tony to come on, I just thought we would just stay in the ACC, but with his past with the Pac-12 and everything going on over there, I figured, okay, I have to have Tony on. We have to have that conversation when he's on the show. So we'll talk about that as well. And ACC Kickoff or ACC Media Days was this week. We'll talk about that. Tony covers Wake Forest, so we'll talk about them as well. Of course, remember they lose Sam Hartman, who's now going to Notre Dame to be the quarterback up there. So then in the second half of the show, we will talk with Chris Gordy from Locked On SEC. I know it's been over a week since SEC Days, Media Days ended, but we will talk with Chris. He was there at Media Days. Just his overall thoughts, the announcement of going to Dallas next year, being in Nashville this year. How was that? The favorites of this league, just the storylines, different teams. We'll talk Alabama, we'll talk Auburn, we'll talk Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. And then to close out the show, we'll transition into the National Football League. Good friend, he's been on so many different shows I've done, Matt Barbato from the Betting Pros and Fantasy Pros. We will preview the AFC East. So in our lead up to college football season, a lot of team previews, conference previews, but also each week on try to preview one of the NFL divisions as we head into football season. Now, everybody says, is this a football only show? No, we will get into basketball at times here on the show as well. It's just, look, we're about to hit August. Football season is almost here. So when football's going on, football is going to obviously be the most important thing, but we will not neglect basketball. There's no basketball guest on the show today. Probably won't be any next week either, but when something happens in college hoops, I prefer college basketball over the NBA. But when stuff like that happens, and we'll transition that, and especially after football season, college basketball will become a big part of the show, and we'll sprinkle that in during football season too as well when they get going. Also, so that's pretty much the menu for the show. Like I said, I put on social media on Friday night. It's a stacked show. It is a very stacked show, and I'm very excited for it. Real quickly, just remember, if you want to follow me on social media, P Jordan SEC, very easy to find, especially on Twitter. I guess are we still calling it Twitter right now? I'm going to go with that till I'm told otherwise. So follow me on Twitter over there. And like I said, you can check out the show on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple and Spotify especially. We're on YouTube on the Phillip Jordan Media YouTube channel. Just check that out. The show goes up on there every single week. And the interviews will be sprinkled as individual videos later on as well. And the podcast, the audio is split in 2 parts. I just feel like it's very I guess it can be intimidating for podcast listeners if they pop in and say, "Oh man, this podcast went 2 hours or 2.5 hours." Um, that's a pretty long commitment. But if you kind of split it up in maybe 2 hour, a little over an hour episodes, a little bit not as daunting when you look at it. And I've done it with some of the podcasts I listen to. I was like, wow, they went 2+ hours here. That's going to be a long show. But when it gets split up, you're like, okay, for some reason your mind thinks, hey, it's not as bad. It's not as bad. A little over an hour. But anyways, that's kind of how the audio thing would do. So maybe I should put the full show up. I don't know, but I'll also split up in hours. I don't know. It is trial and error here on the first episode of the Weekend Blitz. But before we jump into the guests, look, most weeks I will have a longer open than this. That what I'm about to do now. This is the open. That was just letting you guys know what's going on. I normally will do a longer open, like I said. I will usually do a longer open. Went 30 minutes with pretty much every guest. Almost 40 there with Tony. So you're going to enjoy that. But I want to say this, just the news of the week. And going into this, when you do a Saturday show, this is not my first rodeo with a Saturday show. I've done this in the past. A couple years ago, I was at an ESPN affiliate here in Dothan, Alabama. I had a Saturday morning show. That was only an hour. But you kind of, as the week goes on, you see stories, you see headlines, and you're kind of like, okay, is this what I want to open the show with, or is these multiple things, something I want to open the show with? And honestly, going at the beginning of the week, I said, okay, ACC kickoff is this week. Big Ten Media Days also are this week. Somewhere in there, we could jump into that. And then as the week goes on, okay, Jim Harbaugh, the 4-game suspension. I said, okay, that could be something I could jump into. One, it is what it is. The 4 games are easy. I think Michigan's going to be fine. So then that happens. And then I thought, okay. But now the Colorado stuff drops. And I was like, okay, that's got to be my open. And now we will get more in detail with this with Tony when he comes on the show, just because, like I said, in the open there, his past, his history, covering the Pac-12. Tony just knows so much about college football. So we'll go at length. We'll get more in depth with Tony on this. I just want to talk about from the interviews. Colorado heading back to the Big 12. It just sounds right to me. Can Nebraska, Missouri go back? And my SEC brothers say, no, we lose a team. You'll find somebody. There's some other stuff in here that could be fixed if Missouri wanted to go back to the Big 12, where it just makes sense. Same thing with Nebraska. Nebraska has never felt right in the Big 10. I'm just sorry. I mean, that was – I'm not going to get into that. It's going to make this open a whole lot longer. But Colorado heading to the Big 12. And Colorado's a much bigger brand right now than they were this time last year. Colorado, you just look at them and what they were. It's okay. One of the worst, if not the worst program in the Pac-12 last season. What value does this program bring? How valuable was it to the Pac-12? But then you hire Deion Sanders, primetime, Coach Prime. So you bring him in. So now automatically your program is a bigger deal. Team that was very bad last year. He's changed already the national attention to Colorado. Nobody cared this time last year. Nobody cared during the regular season last year about Colorado. But when you bring Deion in, that changes things. So now you look at it too. People are going to want to put Colorado on TV. And then just the fumbling of the Pac-12. And it's one of the things too, when I look at the Pac-12 and the Big 12, I look at 2 conferences that had similar things happen to them. Not exactly the same, but similar. We know 2 years ago what had happened when, Oklahoma, Texas, they're leaving, they're going to the SEC, where they're putting the Big 12 at. Of course, that was before Brett Yarmark was the commissioner of the Big 12. And then now we see last year, Utah and UCLA are leaving to go to Big 10. So these 2 conferences, your biggest players are leaving. Simple as that. What do you do? How do you react? That's a big judge of character. Bad things are going to happen to you. Things you don't expect are going to happen. But how do you react? And the Big 12 has handled this and done so much better than the Pac-12. Like I said, you lose those. Where are you going at for the Pac-12? I mean, as soon as USC and UCLA announced they were leaving and going to the Big Ten, it was like, okay, who's going to poach who from what, And in the Big 12, there was rumors what they were going to do. And you look at who they've had. They've had Central Florida, Houston, BYU, and Cincinnati. Do those four equal Oklahoma and Texas? From a brand name, probably not. But those teams have been successful from where they're at. BYU's got history. Cincinnati's been good over the last couple of years. Man, those are different coaching staff now, but they've been to the playoff, the first group of 5 team to do so. Houston with Dana Holgorsen, he knows what it's like in the Big 12. He's coached in group of 5, Power 5 football. And then Central Florida, we've seen them have success, and Gus Malzahn's kind of known to luck out and have a really big year every now and then. And then you bring Colorado, you bring Dion. Now, you got to feel like they're going to go in another team. Are they going to be a 13-team conference? No. You've seen talk of UConn, which Brett Yormark is a guy that seems to be a big basketball guy. So do they go that direction? I mean, that basketball can sell stuff, but we all know this is football driven. I mean, it's just a fact. I mean, if you're a big basketball fan out there watching this or listening and you're saying, college basketball is awesome. It is. I love it. March Madness is one of my favorite things. I take vacation off every year to watch that first week. I'm a big college basketball fan. I love basketball. But we just got to know business, and football's the driving force behind this. So does UConn do things for you? But then you look at the Pac-12, which they were vulnerable before all this. They're extremely vulnerable now. Arizona State, do they come? Utah, is that a team that the Big 12 can go get? What happens with Oregon and Washington? I mean, how often do we see people speculating that those two teams could be headed to the Big 10 when UCLA and USC did? And there's going to be teams that get left out. Will there be teams in the Pac-12 that I'll have to go to Mountain West, or will they just go grab Mountain West teams, and then will the Pac-12 become a group of 5 conference? Very intriguing. And it's just the Pac-12 is in trouble. I mean, they are in serious trouble right now. They may survive. There may always be a Pac-12 conference, but they're not going to be what they are, especially in football. So we'll see. We'll see what happens and see how strong the Big 12 gets now. And that actually leads me into the last part I want to talk about here. So I saw this on Twitter on Friday morning. FSU 247 writer Chris Nee put it out there that FSU may be wanting to get out of the ACC. What does that mean? Obviously, you automatically look at Florida State. Oh, yeah, that's an SEC-style school. So you might think, okay, Florida State goes to the SEC. Well, the SEC is a 16. I don't see the SEC adding another team unless the Big Ten does. I feel like Greg Sankey, the SEC people, I feel like just from what has been said, I feel like they're happy with the 16 they have. They would add more if they felt like that's the direction they needed to go. I mean, Florida State and Clemson makes sense. But then Florida State to the Big Ten, I don't know. It's just, and I know USC and UCLA, I mean, at least there's a history there with the Big Ten and the Pac-12. I don't know. Florida State being in the Big Ten doesn't make sense. Big 12, but Florida State, would you want to go there? SEC makes the most sense with Florida State, but I think that has to come along with Clemson too. But we'll see. I mean, that's just words. And we've heard speculation about Florida State before, so we shall see how that goes. But that's just kind of my thoughts to open up the show with kind of what's been I think the big storyline of this past week is that going on there. Anyways, guys, next up, I'm going to play the interviews. So here's the order. You will hear them. You will hear Jeff Culhane, voice of the Florida State Seminoles. Then you'll hear Tony Siracusa, managing editor of Last Word on College Football. And then after that, you'll hear Chris Gordy, host of Locked On SEC. And then we'll close it up with AFC East preview with Matt Barbato. And then I will close up the show after that. All right, my first guest up this week is the voice of the Florida State Seminoles, director of broadcasting at the Seminole Sports Network. That is Jeff Culhane. And Jeff, I appreciate you coming on the show. You know, we talked about I'm from Dothan, so not too far from Tallahassee. Always a lot of people excited in this area about the Seminoles, but it's an honor to have you on the show today.
Phillip, it's great to be on the Blitz with you, and I'm happy that you reached out. Love talking football, and we were talking off air a moment ago about high school football and some of the things that you've got going on. And so, Friday Night Lights, man, that's a big part of where I got started in my broadcasting career, and looking forward to another season here in Tallahassee with Mike Norvell and this Florida State football program. I can't wait.
Yes, it's exciting times. Of course, this week, ACC kickoff. I always mess up and call it ACC Media Days because every other conference calls it that. But I do try to be correct, Jeff, when I talk about that. So it is an exciting week for the conferences overall too, with all that going on.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, obviously, from a Florida State perspective, the Noles were a big talking point on Wednesday, and it's always great to listen to Mike Norvell. He is an inspirational figure. You talk with people here in Tallahassee and around the Seminole family, and they see a lot of similarities between Bobby Bowden and Coach Norvell. And getting to know him over the last year or so has been an absolute joy. And what you see is what you get. He is full of energy, enthusiasm, inspiration, but he's as competitive as anyone out there, and even more so, and has a huge love for his players and everyone around his football program. And then, Jordan Travis, Jared Verse, Kalen DeLoach all represented Florida State University in just a first-class fashion, and being able to get to know those young men as well as so many others around this program has been a ton of fun and really a joy. And you can see why this team turned it around a year ago, Phillip, and won 10 games, and why they're being talked about, as a squad that can win an ACC championship and maybe get themselves into a college football playoff, what they have returning. So fun to watch those four represent FSU in first-class fashion. And obviously, I thought the ACC network crew did an amazing job again. Those are long days, a lot going on. I thought it was great coverage, and fun to see the other teams and other coaches and players, student athletes talk about their goals and hopes for the upcoming year. And I think the ACC is going to be a very, very intriguing conference here in this fall of 2023.
Yeah, I do too as well. It's got a lot of interesting teams in the conference overall. Before we kind of get into, we're going to talk a little bit about Florida State last year. You talk about the turnaround and going into this team. Just whenever I have another broadcaster on the show, and I get this opportunity to, I always like to pick your brain a little bit on the journey to that. What got them into it? What made them want to jump into that arena? Just my curiosity always piques for that. How did it all start for you?
Well, I'll try and keep it as compact as possible here because I'm getting old and we've had a few stops along the way. But, I grew up in Mitchell, South Dakota, and was in love with sports from the day I can remember. Loved playing them. And in my house, I should say my father's house, the radio was always on. The house I grew up in, he always had the radio on in the morning, at night. Listening to games. We did not have a pro team, obviously, in South Dakota. We didn't have at the time a Division I squad, and there still isn't an FBS school in South Dakota or North Dakota. But, when you listen to the high school or college games, they weren't on TV either, so you listen to the radio. And there just grew a love from me as a kid of listening to different announcers. And I always was fascinated by the venues they said that they were at and trying to, in my mind, put myself there. And what did these places look like? And, what did they mean to different people? And so growing up, I was a part of it. My dad was in radio, part-time. He was also a public address announcer at our high school and college in Mitchell, South Dakota. And so I was kind of around a microphone. I was around a booth a little bit. But I love to play. I love sports. I played 4 years of college football, 1 season of college baseball, and started working in radio when I was 14 years old, and really got into play-by-play in college. And so, as you talked about, or we talked about a little while before we started recording, high school football, a memory came back to me where my first full-time job, a guy and a friend of mine by the name of Lane Grendel, who I worked with in South Dakota and also in Nebraska. He is now one of the play-by-play radio announcers for the Milwaukee Brewers and works with Bob Uecker, does games with Uke. He and I sat on the metal bleachers in the grandstand in Tyndall, South Dakota, Bonham High School. I forget who they were playing, but it was a tape delay, Phillip, radio broadcast where we brought a boom box with cassette tapes, and we sat in the stands around the parents, and we called the game, recorded it, and then we put it in and produced it for air the next morning. And that's what we did with my first high school play-by-play almost 20 years ago now. And so moved around since then, worked with some great people in Lincoln, Nebraska, Morgantown, West Virginia, and got my first big play-by-play opportunity at North Dakota State in Fargo, North Dakota, before replacing the great Gene Deckerhoff here last season. So it's been a journey, but I've gained a lot of friends and learned a lot every step of the way, and wouldn't change a thing in any way.
Oh no! When I was looking at the stops you have before getting to Tallahassee, you and Bobby Bowden have a lot in common. Stop at West Virginia before you get to Tallahassee.
Yeah, we both certainly had time in Morgantown with Coach Bowden as a head coach there. I actually saw Coach, I believe it was back in 2014 or 2015 when he was inducted into the WVU Sports Hall of Fame, and saw him in the press box. And there's not many people when they walk into a room, you feel their presence without them saying a word, and Bobby Bowden is one of them. And I wish I would have got a chance to know Coach Bowden a lot better. He impacted so many, touched so many lives, and such a great person. Got to meet his wife, Ann, last fall at the creation of the Bowden Society, a part of Seminole Boosters, which is a great fund in support of Florida State athletics. And met, his daughter Robin as well. And so I've been able to get to know the Bowden family a little bit over the last year. And so, yeah, we do have a little bit of crossover. And it was always, when I was in Morgantown, the connections between Florida State and West Virginia. Jimbo Fisher grew up in Clarksburg, West Virginia. One of his best friends is Mike Carey, who was the women's basketball coach at West Virginia I worked for when I was calling women's basketball games. And it was kind of bizarre when you think about it and look back upon the connections through your journey to get where, my family and I are at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'm about to bring that up when I talk to Jeff about the West Virginia part of it. Going into Tallahassee last year, I mean, hey, you're a good luck charm, Jeff. You come in and then they win 10 games. Florida State gets back to what people are used to them being, a competitive top team in the ACC. And going into this year, obviously, I know a lot of people got hopefully national championship aspirations. But that first year, what stood out to you the most your first year? I mean, was it the LSU game, later the Florida game, the bowl game? I mean, what was your big memories for last year with the Seminoles?
Well, Phillip, I'm going to take all the credit for a 10-win season last year. It was all me. I did everything. No, I'm certainly joking, of course. What stood out to me was the culture that was instilled from Mike Norvell. And it was very apparent to me during fall camp that this was a team that needed to have some early season success, because you could feel the team coming together even early in the year, and you could feel the belief that was there, that Coach Norvell and this great staff that he has working with them has instilled and put in place. And you saw Jordan Travis in fall camp look confident and look like he had made some big strides throwing the football. As far as games are concerned, obviously the LSU game is one I will never forget. Just the way what that game meant to everyone, to Coach Norvell, to the team, to the fan base, That was a game Florida State needed it from a mental health standpoint to have that win. People forget the Louisville game, Phillip. The Louisville game was a massive game for the blueprint of last season. A Friday night on the road, national television, ACC lid lifter in a place that's tough to play. And Louisville's a good team. They got good talent. And a guy, Malik Cunningham, who is as good as anyone last year with what he can do in college football. That was a huge win. Injuries. Tate Rodemaker coming in. Jared Verse goes down. Robert Cooper goes down. I think Big Rob Scott went down during the game. To win that game, coming out of LSU off of a bye, that was another huge stepping stone for this team. And then at the end of the year, to win 6 in a row, to beat Miami 45-3 on the road, the Florida game just speaks for itself. Every single year, there's so much passion around that game, and the scene on Bobby Bowden Field after the clocks hit 0 was an amazing memory. And then, the 25th 10-win season is captured with that victory over another great program in Oklahoma, winning 35-32. A lot of great memories last fall on year number 1, and a season many of us will not soon forget.
Yeah, I know. Watching that game last year between Florida and Florida State, it brought back memories of like, this is what this rivalry is between these two. I mean, because I remember, I'm 36, so I remember when these two teams played. One, a national title could be at stake when these two get together. It just had that feel. I mean, and I know Florida wasn't having a great year last year. They were 6-16 overall last season, but it just had that feel like this is back. Florida and Florida State's back to where it used to be.
Yeah, it was great to have it on a Friday night. It was the only show in town, Friday after Thanksgiving, national television on ABC. But also, you saw from the Florida State faithful, the Seminole fans, what it means to them. And, a holiday weekend where a lot of people could have said, I'm gonna watch this one on TV. No, sir. Sold out crowd, 79,560. And Florida was without some guys, and Florida State had some guys nicked up as well. And both teams just really played their tails off. And you could tell it meant a lot as all these games should. This one had a different feel around it compared to any other I've been a part of in my career. And so it truly is one of those games where it doesn't matter what the record is. It doesn't matter who's playing or who's in or who's out. You better be ready to go. And I think you saw both teams fight back and forth, and you saw the type of game that we did.
Going into this season, and Florida State's one of the favorites in the ACC. I feel like it's them and Clemson as the two top teams, the two favorites in the ACC. But when you look at this team, Jordan Travis coming back for another year. I know everybody wants to talk Caleb Williams and Drake May, but hey, don't forget about Jordan Travis. Right. He's a really accomplished quarterback. 4th year. I mean, very experienced quarterback too. I mean, there's nothing he hasn't really seen. They have Trey Benson coming back at running back. Johnny Wilson is at receiver. I really like their addition to Keon Coleman. I think that's going to be big for them. I mean, he's a really talented. It was between them and Ole Miss, it felt like, to get him. But offensively, when you look at this Florida State team, and we saw what they did last year, the numbers, what excites you about going into this year, what they can improve on?
Phillip, you laid it out right there, man. I mean, those are some big names. And I would add the tight end room with Jaheim Bell.
Yep.
I think Jaheim Bell I've been talking a lot about him in the offseason. The way Mike Norvell gets creative with his tight ends and the versatile player that Jaheim Bell is. I mean, he lined up in the backfield at South Carolina. They handed him the football. He obviously make plays. He had a huge game against Tennessee and their huge upset win of Tennessee last year late in the season. He played great. So many weapons. What are you going to take away if you're an opposing defense? If you bring somebody down to try and corral Trey Benson or even Jordan Travis in the quarterback run game, you're going to leave single coverage on Johnny Wilson or Keon Coleman or Kentron Portier, Ja'Kai Douglas in the slot. You've got Winston Wright, who, people at West Virginia were devastated when he left West Virginia. And, sadly got into the car accident last spring that took his season away last year. But it sounds like he's progressing well and has, the health back and is a huge talent with what he has done so far. in his collegiate career. I don't know what kind of role Hakeem Williams is going to have at a Stranahan High in Fort Lauderdale. He's lost 10 pounds from spring ball. He needed to lose a little weight, get in better shape. He's got a pro look to him as a true freshman, and so I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. And I think Lawrence Toafili, with the way the game is set up in the NFL, with his skill set and versatility, can be a guy that makes it to the next level, catching the ball out of the backfield and line up all over the place and making people miss. So, what do you take away if you're an opposing D? And I haven't even mentioned Kyle Morlock or Marquiston Douglas or those guys, right? And so, and we're just talking skill now as well. Mike Norvell has the offensive line that he's been working towards with returning talent and added pieces in the portal with Jeremiah Byers, Casey Roddick, and Keandre Jones, where he has experience. Finally, 2020, you're playing true freshmen up front. Now, according to Phil Steele, it's the most experienced returning offensive line he's ever seen in doing the college football preview. So you have all that, and you're coming off of a year where you put up huge numbers and we're one of the best offenses in all of college football. So, where do they get better? Man, I can't wait. I'm going to, we got to get our popcorn ready to see what this group is going to look like, because they have a lot of pieces to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. The defense, maybe the best recruiting job, Jared Verse coming back. This is a guy that probably could have been drafted in the first round, coming back to school. Every ACC and LSU quarterback added in there as well is probably looking and said, okay, I got to know where that guy is at, because he's coming after me. But the thing about their defense, they have so many other guys. Patrick Payton, that's another guy that can get after. And then you mentioned earlier he was at media days. Jared Verse was too as well. Kalen DeLoach comes in. You've got so many talented players on the defense. Yeah, I think Jared Verse is the headliner. Everybody talks about him, but hey, just don't focus on him. You got a whole bunch of other guys you got to worry about.
Well, Philip, the thing I've learned around successful college football teams and what I've seen in different stops and what Georgia has done here recently is you have to have 8 or 9 deep along the defensive line, 9 or 10 deep, and you can't have a fall off in talent when the next group rolls in. That's what Mike Norvell's done. Adam Fuller and this defensive staff have done here with the defensive line. And he talked about some of the names. Gilbert Edmond, another South Carolina transfer, is a tremendous talent. Braden Fisk out of Western Michigan, I feel like, is a guy we're going to fall in love with this year, with his motor and wanting to make a name for himself coming from a Group of 5 program out of Western Michigan in the MAC. Darrell Jackson, it sounds like, is going to get the waiver, and that means he got 6'4", 335 available, along with Joshua Farmer, his high school teammate at Gaston County. So it's a group up front where, a year ago, and I didn't even name Fabian Lovett, who I think when he was in the game was as dominant as any player in the ACC a year ago. So it's a group up front that is mimicking what Georgia is doing along the defensive line. And so you got to stay healthy. If you do suffer a few injuries, which you will during the year, now you have more bodies and more skill to handle some of those injuries. And so I think that is a big focus defensively.
Yeah, absolutely. I still remember going into last year, everybody talking about Jared Verse. I know I keep talking about him, like how good he was at Albany coming in, and you see this, I'm like, how was this guy not on a school of Florida State's manager? How did he go through high school without coming to a bigger school like a Florida State or one of those kind of schools? But hey, everybody's misfortune is Florida State's fortune in that scenario.
Yeah, no question. Amazing story, and a guy that was going to high school in central Pennsylvania that didn't get any offers except an offer to play tight end at UAlbany. And then COVID hit, and he lived in the weight room for 365 days. And he gained 40 pounds of muscle. They moved him to D-end. And that year, the FCS played a spring season. He jumped off the page at everybody and was the CAA Defensive Freshman of the Year. I actually saw him, Phillip, inside the Fargo Dome to open up the fall of 2021 when he was at UAlbany. I watched Jared Verse play, called the game between North Dakota State and Albany. And so saw him play, did some research on him, and knew he was a pretty special player. And I'm glad he and I are both in Tallahassee together right now.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people are happy. Both of you are in Tallahassee. And then the schedule. I've been all off season. I've been studying and just looking at the Florida State schedule, and I just look at it just from if they want. If you want to reach that goal, the playoff, the ACC championship, month of September, it looks like it's just going to be huge. That LSU game to kick things off, and then later in the month you play at Clemson, and look, if things go how people think, probably going to be seeing Clemson more than once this season. Just what's your thought? Just going into the schedule, that LSU game in Orlando this time, so it's in more Seminole territory now. But just overall, when you think about the schedule.
Well, I think you said it. September is going to tell us a lot. I think it's a huge opportunity to play LSU, on a neutral site. I think it will be pretty close to 50-50. Their fans will travel. It's our home state, and so certainly we're going to have a ton of garnet and gold there as well. But this is going to have a college football playoff kind of atmosphere at Capital World Stadium. And so huge opportunity to make a statement nationally against an LSU team that will be ready. They'll remember what happened a year ago. They'll be fired up and ready to play. And certainly they're more understanding of Brian Kelly and what he expects, and they're more understanding of their personnel. But Florida State is a better football team as well than what they were in Game 2 last season. And they'll have the confidence to know they beat this LSU team. And I would argue Florida State's personnel is better than what it was a year ago at this time with what they've done in recruiting and the transfer portal. So a great chance there. I'll tell you what, Boston College is improved. And, I don't know if they're going to, win 9 or 10 games or 8 games. I'll say they're not. But I think Boston College is not going to be any pushover on September 16th. They'll be better. Christian Mahogany is back along the offensive line. Emmett Moorhead can throw it. They will miss Zay Flowers. That's a huge loss. He was one of the best players I saw all year a season ago in the first-round draft pick of the Ravens. So they'll be better, but that's a game, obviously, Florida State will be favored in by more than likely double digits. And then the Clemson game, Phillip. I mean, I went back and watched. It reminds me, I think, a lot of the 2013 game where, you had 3 versus 5 and you're in Death Valley. And Florida State is looking to make a return to national prominence after some time off. You had an Orange Bowl victory, win the year before against Northern Illinois. But, you're trying to, kind of climb the ladder there. And so I think it reminds fans of that game a little bit. I would imagine that Clemson will be unbeaten. The hope is, and I believe Florida State will be as well. And so you got 2 huge games against 2 huge sets of Tigers that you're going to face in the month of September. Games late in the year. I think the end of the season is challenging. I think the Duke game is one you can't sleep on. I know it sounds crazy. Duke has never beaten Florida State, but Riley Leonard and the returning production. I think Mike Elko is a good coach. That's a game to watch out for at the end of a 3-game homestand at Doak Campbell Stadium. And then road games at Wake, at Pitt. I think Pitt's going to be very, very physical and good once again. And then 2 of the last 3 with Miami at home and at Florida in Gainesville. So, and then the ACC championship. You're hoping it could be a rematch at Clemson once again. So it's a schedule that looks like you have some holes in it at times. I think it's going to be one that challenges this team and will get them ready and show everybody around the country that if you win all your games, obviously you're going to set yourself up into a good spot. And I think you have a chance as well if you lose one to put yourself in position to still make the college football playoff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if the Florida State fans are getting tired of seeing Brian Kelly because it's been the 3rd year in a row they've had to see him because his last year at Notre Dame they opened against Florida State. So they're
third week 1 meeting in a row between Brian Kelly and Mike Norvell. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some people forget about the Notre Dame part of it. Just think about that one. But anyways, Jeff, this has been great having you on. I've kept you a few minutes over. I know what I said I would have you on, but listeners and viewers want to follow you. And the podcast, Behind the Mic, you got going too as well.
Yeah, Phillip, thanks. Yeah, we're starting that back up next week. So we'll have that out. It's on all your podcast platforms. Just search Behind the Mic. It's the official podcast of FSU Athletics. We're going to have Mike Norvell on the pod next Friday. And it's always great conversating with him. and working on some other guests as well. Brooke Wyckoff, I think, will join us. The Florida State women's program is heading over to Greece for a European tour coming up next week. Phil Steele will stop by the show. We will talk with Jared Verse and Kalen DeLoach, a conversation I had right before media days, the ACC kickoff, right, with them, and so much more. Baba Miller will be on the program after his trek over to Hungary with the Spanish team that won the FIBA U19 World Cup. So a lot in the hopper, and obviously fall camp right around the corner for Florida State.
Absolutely. It is the best time of year upon us. 4 weeks. I count week 0. We're about 4 weeks until college football season kicks off. And Jeff, I do appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time. And I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Phillip, thanks for having me, and look forward to chatting with you down the road. And go Noles.
Everybody, next up here on the Weekend Blitz, I am joined by our great managing editor over at Last Word on College Football. I got to get them brownie points in somehow, Tony. Tony Siracusa is with me here today. Talking more ACC here in the first hour. Tony, it's always great to see you and talk to you.
Look, I'm happy you got a show back. I'm happy you're doing it on Saturday mornings. Saturday mornings are built for college football, so I think the timing is great, and I'm excited about you doing a new show.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. It's exciting, nervous, all at the exact same time as it's always.
To be.
Yep. You always want that first one to go really, really smoothly. So that's the important part. First impressions and all.
There you go.
When I asked you to come on, it was last week. I messaged you and I said, let's talk ACC. I know you'd be there at ACC.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think we'd lead with the Pac-12 though in our conversation. Your old stomping grounds.
It is.
But I saw. I get Bleacher Report 2 news to my email, and I believe their headline this morning. I read my email. It says, "Is the Pac-12 screwed?" And I think that's that kind of seems like they are doomed. I'll use that word. They're doomed. What's up with the Pac-12?
Well, like you said, just as a reference point, it is my old stomping ground. I spent 5 years covering UCLA and the Pac-12, and I think if I had given Chip Kelly a heads up that I was moving to Charlotte, he probably would have helped me pack. I'm sure he was eager for me to leave and get out of his hair. Look, the Pac-12 has two main issues right now. First one is the ghost of Larry Scott, the previous commissioner, who left things in just a horrible state when he retired, resigned, was pushed out the door. Take your pick. When his contract was up, there was no chance of an offer to stay any longer. Larry Scott was horrible with media negotiations. So they were stuck with the Pac-12 network, which is not carried on DirecTV or any AT&T outlet. So you miss 2/3 of the West Coast potential viewers. So that hamstrung the conference in terms of the money that they were giving back to the schools. And the Pac-12 network is likely 99% going away next year. It will be eliminated. The new commissioner, George Kliavkoff, not a fan of the product because it's too hard to monetize. And so they will work on the production front of whatever streaming service the Pac-12 brings in as part of the new TV deal. Then you bring in George Kliavkoff, who came from MGM Resorts and had negotiated media contracts and sponsorship contracts and all of these things. The first thing, and he's been there a little over 2 years now, the first priority had to be getting that new TV deal done because their TV deal expires in June of 2024. So at the end of the upcoming academic year. And look, you got to believe he's been working on it, but there is nothing there. We're now in July. We're almost at the end of July, as I have to check my date. We're almost at the end of July, and there's still nothing. The president's and chancellors of the universities, basically what he refers to as his CEO group, have been telling him since March, you got to get it done by end of April. And they've been trying to kind of toe the company line, say, yeah, we're confident. It's coming soon. It's coming soon. April went by, May went by. Again, we're now end of July, and he's got nothing. In the interim, a year ago, June, he, of course, was dealt the huge blow, which he did not see coming, which was the departure of USC and UCLA. That negatively impacted any of the media negotiations because you just lost the number 2 media market in the entire country. Mm-hmm. And I know fans in other parts of the country will kind of take some shots at UCLA football, whatever, USC, fine. It's the media market. It is the number 2 media market in the entire country. Your entire conference was just devalued from a media rights negotiation standpoint. So he had to, and he did not see it coming. Frankly, nobody did. I mean, it was a shocker. I will tell you, I was out running some errands that day. I figured it's June. I got a little time to myself, right? I mean, we're not in conference media days yet. And my phone starts pinging and people telling me this is coming. You're not going to believe what I just heard. And people, sources that I have from within the conference. And, you know, I stopped what I was doing, jumped in my car, ran home, you know, and there it was. But like I said, a huge blow to the media negotiations. Since then, there's been no recovery. There is nothing else that has come. There have been inklings that ESPN has said, thank you, but no thanks, in terms of being the tier 1 media partner. Fox has done the same. You have a tier 2 media partner for the year in the Pac-12 network. You need a tier 3 in reality, which logic says it'll be a streaming network, much like what the NFL did. Maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's Apple. But because those entities have never done college football, they need more time to kind of kick the tires and see how this all works and that it's different from the NFL product. And so it takes a lot more time. You fast forward. Actually, let me digress for 30 seconds. There have been all these reports from West Coast reporters that have been like, Pac-12 is fine. Yeah, it's down to 10 schools, but they're going to stay together. They're all going to sign a grant of rights deal. Kickoff wants to says they won't leave for 4 or 5 years or whatever the new TV deal will be. And so there were leaks, but they were leaks in the wrong direction. These few media guys were talking to the wrong sources and they were being misled for the purposes of a little bit of conference propaganda almost. So you fast forward to Pac-12 Media Day last Friday, and Kickoff just bombed, absolutely bombed. There was no new TV deal yet to announce. All the media is there, and that's all they want to talk about. Yeah, it's fine. We'll talk to the coaches and the players, but let's talk about why you don't have a media deal. It was okay that he didn't have one yet, but he needed to have something to announce, even if it was, look, we're close. We're not ready yet, but we're close. The lawyers are looking at it. We're dotting I's, crossing T's, whatever. He had nothing. His answer to the question was, because a reporter from the Oregonian asked him about, you know, where are we with this? And his answer was, we're not discussing the new TV deal today because we want the focus to be on football. You roll along for 10 minutes and someone finally thinks to follow up. Wait a second. Does that mean you have a TV deal and you're just not announcing it? And the answer was no, you're reading too much into this. The reason they didn't announce it is because there was nothing to announce. And by playing this kind of cat and mouse game, it was horrible. Now, let me tell you what we found out within minutes of that happening is Colorado athletic director Rick George got up and left Pac-12 Media Day. He went to the airport, hopped on the private jet, and went back to Boulder early. He was supposed to stay through the rest of the day, maybe even into set. He left. He was pissed off, and he left. And now you fast forward, and Colorado is out the door. They are headed back to the Big 12. The announcement has been made. A vote from the Board of Regents was taken, and the proposal was agreed to unanimously. There were geeks like me who were actually streaming the Board of Regents meeting. Thank goodness for Colorado tax dollars being well spent that they put the meeting up on streaming. And they all talked about, it was a shame. They really wanted to stay with the Pac-12, but they got to look out for their future. And you can't have a future when you don't know what's next. You have to have some sense of what's next. Colorado's not going to be the last one to leave. I mean, he's got a few weeks, maybe, to get something put together, or there will be at least one more. We've gone back and forth with our sources this week, and even while I was at ACC Media Days in Charlotte, and there will be at least one more. He's got about 2 weeks to fix this, or someone else is out the door.
When I look at this, Tony, and I look at the Big 12, and I look at two conferences that were basically, in a way, in the same position. Yeah. I mean, they lose Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, look, the teams they have in the Big 12, they're great. I think it's going to be a fun conference when Texas and Oklahoma are gone. But look, it's Texas and Oklahoma. Right. That's your two bell cows. That's your two money makers. And then, and then now you look at, like you said, with the Pac-12, losing UCLA and USC, losing that. And now we've seen two commissioners kind of like go in two different directions with this. Right. Brett Yarmark has pretty much taken this, and I mean, he's almost putting the nail in the coffin of the Pac-12, potentially. And then you look at George Kickoff, he's fumbled it. It's like two conferences, same position, going opposite directions.
Well, and here's the irony is when the Big 12 lost their two premier universities, then the Big 12 and Brent Bowlesby, who was the commissioner then, and Kickoff were talking about, hey, maybe we need to kind of have a merge of interest. Maybe we need to talk about scheduling a lot of each other, kind of saving each other. And the Pac-12 said no, because the Big 12 schools did not fit the academic footprint of the Pac-12. The Pac-12, for those who don't know, requires that you be a Carnegie Education Tier 1 research university to qualify to get into the conference. I think there are two schools who are grandfathered out of that if they ever slip, Washington State and Oregon, because they were both founding members of the conference. So they get grandfathered in. They both qualify anyway. But this is the reason why they took Utah instead of BYU years ago. It was because BYU was not a Tier 1 Carnegie education school. Most of the Big 12 schools at the time were not. So Pac-12 kind of thumbed their nose at them. Yarmark is getting the last laugh right now. He issued a statement, which they put out on social media on the Big 12 letterhead, and it just said, Commissioner Brett Yarmark comments on the University of Colorado, and all it said was, quote, "They're back." And that was it. And they issued that. He's having a pretty good laugh right now. And you're right. Two conferences that really had similar issues. But, look, Yarmark was quick to at least get a contract extension on the media rights deal while they were negotiating a new one. Kickoff didn't do that. He's behind the eight ball by a lot right now. So
it's going to be interesting. It's going to be worth keeping an eye on as we get on. So, and then the ACC, let's jump at ACC. They stole the CW from the Pac-12. So there you go.
Well, on that. Yeah. Well, but here's the thing with that, and there is a significant difference that I think needs to be pointed out, is the ACC, because there was talk about the Pac-12 getting on CW, and certainly I was quick to laugh about it, saying, great, they'll, show Washington State versus Arizona after a special rerun of Gilmore Girls, or whatever else the CW. I don't want your audience thinking I'm that familiar with programming on the CW, but I had to look it up. And, the difference is with the ACC is the ACC has its Tier 1 partner, ESPN. Mm-hmm. They have their Tier 2 partner, the ACC Network, which is owned by ESPN. They needed a Tier 3 because Raycom owns the Tier 3 rights. And Raycom was putting them on with the regional sports network, in this case, which was the Bally Sports Network, which is actually currently in bankruptcy and is going to go away before the end of the year. They needed to secure something else. And the CW, I guess during the summer showed a couple of live golf tournaments. And so, now they have some sports background, I suppose. But they're going to show, I think it's 9 or 10 games throughout the course of the year. They're not going to be the high-level games. They're going to be the games you put on your Tier 3 last-level partner. But the ACC was already wrapped up with everything, and this was really just Raycom saying, we need a new distribution point. Pac-12's got nothing, for starting next year. So they're starting from scratch.
So I'm a little bit, outside of the football and the sports stuff. I pay attention to a lot of movie and TV stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the CW is a network that used to have a bunch of superhero shows and everything else, but they cost a lot of money. Those TV shows cost a lot of money. So they've got some new ownership over at the CW. Someone new's running the company, and they want to bring back costs. Well, if Raycom is if they're doing everything, they just have to put it on the air. That's a money saving possibility.
Absolutely.
For the CW.
Absolutely.
Probably Live Golf probably did the same thing. It was probably them doing the production. They're just putting it on their air.
Yeah, you're getting a cut of the ad revenue that comes in. You're getting paid as the distributor. And Raycom is doing all the production and, carrying all the heavy load for it. So it's very beneficial for the CW. I have no idea about their superhero background. It's good to know. So it really is turnkey. And, I have discovered in my office here that it is easier to find the CW than it ever was the Bally Sports Networks. Those things were a nightmare to find and, just to look for a Tier 3 game. So this will work out for everybody. For the ACC. For the Pac-12, they don't have a Tier 1 or Tier 2 starting in 2024.
Oh, so ACC kickoff. I want to get out right, Tony, because I know the ACC is a little bit different. They don't call it media days. They like to call it the ACC kickoff. We all know what it is. But, with the whole week, what we always look at these media days, the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, all of them. What's the storyline? We feel like there's always a general talking point, the coaches, commissioner. Mm-hmm. What for you being there all week? What's kind of been like that storyline, the main thing that coaches and the commissioner and everybody's been talking about?
Well, when you get to the commissioner and you get to Jim Phillips, his name is in the news a lot right now. There were a lot of things he couldn't talk about. He is a named defendant in the Northwestern lawsuit because he was the athletic director there from 2018 to 2021. So some of these allegations that go beyond football and into the baseball team and the volleyball team and whatever allegedly occurred under his watch as athletic director. So first thing out of his mouth on Tuesday was, I can't talk about it. I reject all the allegations, and beyond that, I can't talk about it. I would say that Phillips, for his part, his tone really followed a lot of what Greg Sankey did with the SEC, even what Kickoff did with the Pac-12, Yormark with the Big 12, is talk about NIL, the portal a little bit less, but collectives and the NIL. Because you and I have talked about this, I do not put collectives and NIL in the same sentence. Mm-hmm. NIL in its purest form is a sponsor paying your quarterback to go sign autographs or be a part of his, automotive commercial or whatever, in that direct relationship. The collective is money bundling. It's legalized money laundering, frankly. They just take, the donations from wherever they get them. They're not earmarked for anything in particular, and you're paying players to suit up and play. It's different than what the intentions of NIL were. Anyway, this was a big part of the conversation for Phillips. There is a lot of activity within Washington, D.C., coming up with different bills and different legislation. And I think when you talk to a lot of reporters 5, 6, 7 months ago, they were talking about there's no way. Congress has got no appetite for this. Turns out Congress does. There are 3 bills in draft form right now and another 2 ready to go to subcommittees. The focus of them is that right now there are 38 states that have their own legislation. All of them are different from each other, but they all have the same theme. Our schools can give the middle finger to the NCAA. Don't worry about following the NCAA rules. You follow the state legislation and you're fine. They've basically neutered the NCAA, which had done a good enough job of neutering itself, frankly, for the years coming up to this by not tackling this issue years ago and putting in some guardrails a long time ago when they had the chance. But these states are now basically saying, we're running ourselves, we're running our schools, and this state is running its schools, and so on. There is a desire with all the commissioners to have one national plan. And the only way to do it is to protect the NCAA from lawsuits, because if the NCAA tries to run over the states, they're going to be sued. And they don't have tax exempt status in any way. So they will be sued. So this is the only other way to come up with a national plan to either empower the NCAA via Congress to do this, or Congress does it itself. You hear a lot of interesting takes from the coaches on it. The coaches want these fixes also. It is ironic when you go through the ACC, there is only one state in the school or in the conference footprint that has no legislation. Boston College is not covered by anything because the state of Massachusetts has no NIL legislation. But North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, so on and so forth, Pennsylvania, they all do. There's a feeling that there is a lot of inequities and imbalance because the states are operating, unto themselves. There is a thought process, which I brought up today with one of the coaches, which will, last word on college football, will be covering in more detail next week, is there is one other thing that I would think is in the NCAA's arsenal. And that is membership to the NCAA is voluntary. It's also a two-way street. The agreement says you will follow the NCAA rules, and in exchange, you will be a member and you will get revenue sharing. The NCAA doesn't control Division I college football, but it does March Madness and, the College World Series and the softball, all those other revenue sports. Let one of the universities violate the NCAA rules because they're following the state, and then kick the school out of the NCAA. That is a weapon that the NCAA likely does have at its disposal. It's a huge weapon, and you got to be careful using it. But let's just say, I don't know, pick a school, Texas Tech, right? Violates it, because you're not going to kick Texas out because that's too big. You're going to pick on a smaller school, suspend their NCAA privileges. Doesn't impact football, but it cuts them out of participating in the NCAA tournaments, the postseason tournaments. Takes away their revenue from it. So now you're damaging the conference as well. And you're getting the conference commissioners to have to take an even stronger position. It is a distinct possibility that could happen somewhere down the road if big picture legislation doesn't work.
Right. I know. Reading the tweets and stuff from our Twitter account, it seemed like NIL. NIL was the.
It was.
It
absolutely was. Look, it's because you have some coaches who talk about the NIL is impacting the transfer portal because kids are getting promises allegedly from other schools or the collectives, and the collectives are obviously run by the boosters. Go in the portal, transfer out of where you are, go in the portal, and then come over here and you'll get this. There are coaches who claim to have proof that proof that they say they've turned over to congressional representatives as they're working on these bills, that these kids are getting these promises and then the promises are not being fulfilled on the other end. That also gets you to tampering, which is against NCAA rules. But the NCAA is hamstrung right now. They know if they try and enforce anything with regards to NIL, they're going to get sued. So they just sit back and do nothing. Dave Clawson from Wake Forest today said he had 6 to 8 players who were the subjects of tampering during the offseason. Wouldn't tell us who they were, of course. And, of course, he wouldn't name who did it. There were a couple of us who tried to pin him down. And his answer was it was nobody within the ACC. It was a large budget university and this is his quote, a repeat offender. I think everyone's going to assume it was someone in the SEC because they've got the bigger budgets. But Mac Brown has made the same allegations. Some of his players, including Drake May, his quarterback, been the subjects of tampering. Look, if you're not going to turn these schools into the NCAA, then nothing's going to happen. It's just going to keep going. And you could see the frustration in our Q&A with Clawson. He said, no, I agree. I'm not convinced anything will happen. I'm at the point where I say, you know what? Let's just forget all the rules. Let's just make it even. And there are no rules with regards to recruiting, money, the portal. Just drop all the rules and let's just all let it fly. Now, he doesn't really mean that. He doesn't really want that. But I think it's a frustration point that a lot of coaches have come to.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Clawson because I was going to now transition into Wake Forest for the upcoming season. Would not a transition year, but a team that kind of is in transition because Sam Hartman not being there. I mean, I feel like he was a 10-year senior there at Wake Forest.
It felt like it.
As long as he's been there, just one of those guys that feel like he's been there forever. Record going to Notre Dame. Mitch Griffiths coming in, a guy with experience. Started the first game against VMI last year, was 21 to 29, 288, 3 touchdowns. But for people who don't know, what has Clawson said about him, and what did you see in his one time of action last year?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One, yeah, I agree. It seemed like Hartman was there forever. It felt like he was. And Hartman was a challenge from the media standpoint for us to deal with. He was rarely available to the media. He had an agreement. He wouldn't talk to us during the week after practice or anything. So just post game. And then when Wake Forest went on a 3-game losing streak last year, he was amazingly unavailable for each of those post-game press conferences. Then when he, for the Gasparilla Bowl, where they played Missouri in one of the pre-Christmas bowl games, I asked him literally at the end of the press conference, we all had gotten the word that day that he was not going to the NFL. He was going to go to Notre Dame. It came out pre-game. And we were holding on to it until we talked to him. And I asked him, I said, what is your process for deciding what's next? Talk to your family, take some time off. He literally got up, was running off the stage and said, my thought process is I'm going to whoever has the best drinks tonight. And he left. That was it. That was our Sam Hartman time. Mitch Griffiths is a different kind of dude. He really is. He's not going to overwhelm anybody with his physical skill. They say he's 6 foot tall. He's not, because he comes up to my eyes and I'm not 6 foot tall. So maybe in his spikes on his tippy toes, he's 6 foot tall. He's really 5'10" and a half, maybe 5'11". This is his 3rd year there. So he's been waiting. He has waited. When I talked to him during the Wake Forest part of ACC media days, we talked to him about what kind of vote of confidence did you feel you were getting from Clawson when he didn't go to the portal to look for another quarterback. There have been a lot of quarterback changes around the country and even within the ACC. Did you feel good that Clawson wasn't out shopping for somebody else? Because Clawson said right after spring, Mitch is our quarterback. And he said that Clawson had told him in the spring, I'm not going to look for anybody else. This is your offense to run. So he did have the one game last year as a starter against VMI when Sam had an emergency life-saving surgery. And he played well. He played fine. You had the stats there and he did well, but it was VMI. let's not get too crazy about this. If you haven't seen the Wake Forest offense, it's different. Now, it gets mischaracterized also. There is a part of the offense which is referred to as the slow mesh offense. And if you watch them on TV, the announcers will get overwhelmed talking about the slow mesh. If you come to Last Word on college football, you get the reality of it, which is they run the slow mesh about 25% of the time. The rest of it is a pretty typical RPO offense. But that slow mesh literally has the quarterback and the running back walking up to the line of scrimmage after the snap, with the quarterback literally putting the ball in the running back's gut, forcing the linebackers to either come up and play the run, in which case he'll pull the ball and throw it to a receiver that's gotten behind the linebackers, or if the linebackers drop off, he slaps the running back on the back, which is the key. It's your ball, go, right? And it worked with Sam, because Sam was taller, he was bigger, stronger arm, and he had an over-the-top throwing motion. Griffiths comes at it with a 3/4 angle throwing motion. Now, think about it. You're already right in the faces of the defensive line. You're 5'10" with a 3/4 motion. You're going to have to make a lot of adjustments to that slow mesh offense, because otherwise you're going to have to count on your offensive lineman putting the defensive line down on the ground on every play, which just doesn't happen. So I think one of the biggest changes this new quarterback situation is going to create is you're going to see them roll out of the pocket a lot more than what they did with Hartman. Hartman was not fleet of foot. The coaching staff would convince us, oh, no, remember, he had that 25-yard run against Louisville. Great. That was one. What else you got? Griffiths is a little quicker, a little more fleet of foot. I think you'll see him throw on the run and roll him out of the pocket a lot more than what we're used to seeing with Wake Forest the last 3 or 4 years.
No, I always enjoy watching them play that style of offense. And Tony, when we did this, I said 20 minutes. We fit over 30 minutes. So hey, it's fine. It's fine.
I can sit here and talk college football for the next 3 hours. So
yeah. So ACC kickoff.
Yes.
So it seems like, okay, everybody's talking about Florida State and Clemson. That's the top 2 teams there. Yes. So this is kind of like a double, a 2-part question. I know you're not supposed to do that, but it's a 2-part question for you.
Go right ahead.
One, how do you see that playing out? Who do you see being the ACC champion in the year? Remember, I'm 90 minutes away from Tallahassee, so that would feel good to me if you say Florida State.
Influence me.
And also, if there was a third team, who is it? I mean, I think people think North Carolina just because of Drake May, but those 2 questions, how do you see both of those?
I do think, well, and important caveat here as I answer this, remember, this is the first year where there's no divisions in the ACC. So it is the top 2 teams that will play for the championship. There's no longer an Atlantic and a Coastal division. Now, that having been said, the top 2 teams are Clemson and Florida State. They just are. I'm going to say this, that as we record this, I have not yet submitted my ballot as a voter for the ACC pecking order of how I think, the teams will finish. I have until like midday Sunday to do that. And I'm going to take as much time as I darn well want. But they are the 2 best teams. This is a quarterback heavy conference. And I think you look at, Jordan Travis at Florida State, and he's one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the conference to me. You look at that defense, and it's a very good defense. You got Jared Verse, can dominate an offensive line. And so you like that team a lot. With Clemson has a lot of potential. They are the best team in the conference, and so usually you don't talk potential. They need to show up with a better offense than what they've shown in the past couple of years. And they went out and got Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator from TCU and Lincoln Riley's brother, as their new offensive coordinator. They'll have Cade Klubnik. Clemson fans have been waiting. They were clamoring last year to see Cade Klubnik. They were done with DJ Uiagalelei, who, by the way, I think is going to have a really good season at Oregon State. I think he's going to love running their offense in Corvallis. Jonathan Smith is doing great things up there. Anyway, back to Clemson. The defense is really good. They need much, much more production out of that offense. They need a more creative offense. They've got Will Shipley, who to me is probably the best player in the ACC. The kid's just dynamic as a running back, catching the ball out of the backfield, a special teams player. I think he's the best overall player in the conference. There are better players at their position, but overall, for all the different things he can do, I think he's the best player in the conference. So I do think at the end of it, it comes down to those two. If there is a third team, I'm going to say it's a long drop-off from number 1 and 2 down to the next bunch. There's a significant gap. I would say it's probably North Carolina, and it's because of Drake May, who is going to get a lot of Heisman attention early on. Now, that having been said, there are big adjustments in the offense. Their offensive coordinator, Phil Longo, left to take the same job at Wisconsin. He's longtime friends with Luke Fickell, and so he went to Wisconsin. And that defense has a lot of work to do. I'm still puzzled as to what Gene Chizik is doing with that defense, and I know a lot of Carolina fans share my concerns. We're going to see a lot about them in week 1. They play South Carolina at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. And if you know about Carolina fans, you know that that's going to be predominantly a South Carolina crowd at that game. Charlotte's closer, to South Carolina than it is to Chapel Hill, but that's just also the way those two teams show out. The South Carolina fans travel better. So I think we're going to see a lot about them. The defense, a lot of questions. I think we're going to like watching Duke. I got to tell you, Mike Elko just got a new contract extension, well-deserved. People need to check in their quarterback, Riley Leonard. This kid is really, really good because he plays at Duke, because he plays in the ACC, because he was a redshirt freshman last year. Not many people really caught on to his game. Strong arm, can throw downfield, can take off running for significant yards. I really like watching this kid play. However, Duke has got a really tough schedule. So they can look really good and even improved over last year and only win 6 games and barely make bowl eligibility because of their schedule. It's a good team. I really got to tell your audience, check out Duke when they're on. You're going to like watching Riley Leonard. But I think I'm not sold, by the way, for everyone wondering about the U. I am absolutely not sold on Mario Cristobal's turnaround in Miami. I am absolutely not sold. He's a good coach, a decent recruiter, and I think he needs another 2 years before that program is a championship contender in the conference.
You brought up Duke, and I will close it up on this. When I talked to Eric McLean a few months ago, and I asked him basically the same question, and he brought up Duke. And actually, he said Duke before North Carolina, which
that's fair.
So I mean, there's a lot of people that cover the conference that are liking Duke. So everybody watch Duke. And
absolutely,
Tony, it's been fun. Like I said, we playing 20. We went about 38 here, so it's all good. It's all good. Podcast world, hey, podcasting, YouTubing. I'm not on the radio. I don't have to worry about a break. I don't have that producer going.
You're running your own clock.
That's it. Go as long as you want. But anyways, it's been fun talking ACC, Pac-12 unexpectedly, but it's been fun talking all this stuff, college football with you. Where can the viewers and listeners check you out if they want to follow you online?
Well, they can check us out and your written work, of course, as well at lastwordonsports.com, and you go to that college football button, and there is all of our work. As you know, we have, a lot of digital media sites have shrunk and come under misfortune. We have expanded, and we have the largest team that we've ever had. We've got 30 writers spread out across the country, really talented writers covering teams all across the country. We've got a Facebook page. We've got an Instagram page. They can find us on Twitter at LastWordOnCFB. And if they feel like arguing with me, because you've seen my Twitter feed, I basically don't shy away from argument. Matter of fact, I tend to start some. They can find me at Tony Bruin on Twitter. When I moved to Charlotte and started covering Wake Forest, I did not change my handle to Demon Deacon Tony or whatever. Tony Bruin on Twitter.
Or it's X now, Tony.
On X. It's whatever. The Bird. Well, they used to be Bird app. How's that?
Oh yeah. Everybody go do that. And again, Tony, it's been a lot of fun, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Absolutely. Call me anytime, man.
There we go. Everybody joining me on the show right now is Chris Gordy. You can hear him on Locked On SEC every single day, and also Sports Talk 790 in Houston. And Chris, I appreciate you coming on the show and talking SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. Any chance we get to talk football, it's always a good time. And that's what was so fun with the SEC Media Days is, I think my buddy Matt Moscona describes it as, any week in July we can just take out and talk college football the entire week. It's a good week because not only does it mean we're getting closer to the season, but it's better than the alternative. I mean, I love MLB and but talking Major League Baseball for an entire week in July, yeah, if I could talk college football instead, I'll take that one.
Yeah, it's always a fun week. I know, of course, Steve Spurrier always called it the talking season or doing all that. Being in Nashville, how was it, there, different location being up there in Nashville this time?
Yeah, it's cool. The SEC's done a really good job. Obviously, this is an event that, has been in Hoover, Alabama for so many years. And I started going about a decade ago. And, I remember first year I went, it was right around the Manziel time when A&M and Missouri came to the conference. And I want to say then there was around 15 to 20 radio stations on Radio Row, as they call it. The big media room's always been pretty big with TV stations and writers from all across the South. But, just in the past decade, what I've seen from the Radio Row, I mean, this year I want to say there was 40 to 50 radio stations, with podcasters included now, even more TV stations, even more writers, bloggers, all this kind of stuff. And so it's gotten such that it's such a big event now. I don't know if they can ever go back to the Winfrey Hotel in Hoover. I know they did it, the year right after COVID, but they did Atlanta a couple years ago. They did a return trip to Atlanta last year. And, there were rumors that Nashville was on the docket, and then ultimately they landed it. Well, then last year, I remember hearing rumors that Dallas might be an option. And so this year they announced Dallas next year. So I think they're going to keep moving this thing around to the biggest sites that they can. And, who knows? Talking with some people, they said New Orleans could be on the table. There's plenty of options. I almost think they'd put a bid out. I mean, why not? Jacksonville, let's get some bigger cities into the mix and see Memphis maybe, because it's such a big event. And Nashville did a fantastic job of hosting it. Only problem with the Grand Hyatt Nashville where it was they have road construction going right. It's right on Broadway, right before what's normally a bridge. Well, that entire bridge is being rebuilt. And so they had an entire street blocked off. And so to get into the hotel, I mean, it was pretty tough. Even Uber drivers, like if you want to get around town, they couldn't even figure it out. There was a big blockade, like right outside the street where the hotel was. So that was a little frustrating, but just, being able to walk around the city and stuff like that was really cool. Nashville's a great city, and having everything centrally located in the hotel. It was such a big hotel that hosts a lot of conferences and stuff like that. They really had the right setup, and it was kind of broken up over a couple floors, but almost everything was on that second floor, from Radio Row to the big main media room to the electronic media room. You really didn't have to leave that floor unless, for meals and stuff like that. So, great setup. I think a lot of people I talked to, complimented them on that setup. And I think we'll have probably a similar type setup in Dallas next year. But for those folks who are old school and love the old Winfrey Hotel in Hoover, I don't know if it's ever going back there. Cause like I said, this thing has gotten way bigger, and now adding Texas and Oklahoma starting next year, there ain't no looking back. It's not like it's going to get smaller. It's not like less people are going to have interest in SEC. So yeah, it's cool to see how big it's grown, and it continues to grow.
Yeah, I know. For you selfishly, you got to be kind of happy it's going to be in Dallas next year. It'll be a little bit closer to where you're at.
Yeah, it's funny. We used to, for the early years, we used to drive over to Hoover, and then we got smarter and would fly into Birmingham, and then flew into Atlanta, flew into Nashville. But the advantage of it being in Dallas, living in Houston where I am, is we can drive It's only a couple hours, and we can bring way more equipment. That's the hard part. When you fly, you can't bring as much. You got to pack everything tight. Driving, I mean, you can bring every banner, tablecloth, signage, everything you want up there. So that'll be a little bit of an advantage. But yeah, I'm also curious to see how people react because, I have some friends who are diehard Big 12 fans, and this is a straight up, gang war basically. So saying, hey, we're coming into your territory. We're invading your turf for this thing. And by the way, our thing is bigger and better than yours. So yeah, we saw it at Big 12 Media Days 2 weeks ago. There were some fighting words being thrown around there, taking shots at Texas and Oklahoma on the way out the door. Yeah, there's going to be some big shots next year with the Big 12 having shots at the SEC coming to their town to do SEC Media Days.
Yeah, what was it? The deputy commissioner of the Big 12 said that Texas and Oklahoma Texas just got tired of getting beat by Kansas State, and now they can just get beat by Alabama. So I think that was the quote.
Yeah. It's not a crazy quote. I mean, yeah, we're trying to improve our resume. If we're going to get beat by somebody, I'd rather get beat by Alabama than Iowa State. So yeah, it's like everybody thought that was a shot. I'm like, it makes sense to me. Like, yeah, I get what he's saying is Texas is going to lose games no matter what. So why not lose the better competition? But if I'm Texas, I go, damn right. Yeah. If I lose 2 games to Alabama and Georgia, guess what? I'm getting in the playoff as a 10-2 team with 2 great resume losses.
Yeah. How much do you think the Big 12 would hate it if Texas won the Big 12 in their final year going out?
I am rooting for Texas and Oklahoma to not run the table, but I'm hoping they both represent in the Big 12 title game. And I hope Texas wins the trophy and the commissioner has to hand it to him. And I hope Sark just stares at him while he hands it to him. And then what I would do if it was I'm Sark, I would hold it up for a second, then I would put it on the ground and walk away and go, I'm off to the SEC, bigger and better things. See you guys. Like, I think that would be a total slap in the face. But yeah, just for Brett Yormark to have to hand Sark that trophy this year, I'm rooting like hell for that because, he took a shot. It was like, Texas and Oklahoma, I mean, they didn't even play for our championship last year or in recent years. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's act like TCU is going to take over college football here for the next decade. Stop.
Yeah, you're losing your 2 big your big names, your 2 big money makers. That it doesn't matter what their record is. I mean, they're always going to be top of the conversation with them. But over the last week, SEC Media Days, I know it's a very broad question, but what was probably the biggest highlight for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. In recent years, we've had such big storylines. Like coming out of COVID, how the path to football. And then not too long after that, NIL becomes a thing. Conference expansion becomes a thing. Of course, a couple years ago was when the news broke that Texas and Oklahoma were coming to the conference. All these big storylines, and yet this year there was really no storyline. I mean, it was very interesting. It was very quiet among the coaches. And be real, a lot of the coaches have gotten smart with this thing. They know to go there and not ruffle any feathers, not take any shots, go be diplomatic, get in and get out. And I was really surprised. I mean, I guess, the biggest thing we heard was Lane Kiffin saying that, state of college football is a disaster when it comes to the transfer portal and NIL and all that. But that was really the only big headline. I mean, everything else was kind of, just talking about their teams. And, one thing I did notice, just kind of talking to a lot of the media that cover, folks in all the different cities, radio hosts, TV personalities, all that, is that everybody's optimistic. Like, it's weird because there's always a year like when you feel like your coach is on the hot seat or you go there and go, hey, man, pressure's on. He's got to win this year. I remember Ed Ogeron's last year at LSU being at SEC Media Days. The attitude was, well, this guy's got to win or he could be gone. And it really didn't hear that much from anybody. I mean, even the Texas A&M faithful were saying, we think Jimbo's safe. Like, the buyout is so much, even if he has a 6-6 year, we don't think he's going to be fired because the buyout is still so large. So I just thought that was very interesting how everybody thinks they're going to be good. And it's like I always say, man, like, someone has to suck. Like, not everybody can be good. Like, if you're going to have a conference, someone has to lose, and it can't just be Vanderbilt. Somebody has to come in last place. It was funny. I was doing my ballot, and I kept going back and forth, and ultimately I landed Auburn at 7th in the SEC West. Dead last. Now, I still have Auburn going 6-6 this year. I think they'll make a bowl game, and I think the future is bright. I think the arrow's pointed upward with Hugh Freeze. But, the media voted Mississippi State last, but I keep looking at that roster and going, man, Will Rogers, Jaquavius Marks, Tulu Griffin, all the guys in that defense, Jed Johnson. I'm like, there's too much talent on that roster to say Mississippi State's going to go 5-7. Like, they're going to win some games. And so it's funny, some Auburn fans were in my DM saying, "Oh, how you pick us last?" I'm like, well, guys, like, look at everybody else. Like, you think Ole Miss is going to finish last? You think? I mean, A&M, I don't think they're going to finish last. The media picked them third in the West. They think they're going to bounce back with Jimbo hiring Bobby Petrino, and so yeah, it becomes tough. Like, someone has to be last, but nobody wants to be last. In the East, it's Vanderbilt, probably going to be Missouri just ahead of them. But I'm optimistic on Tennessee and Kentucky. Obviously, Georgia is the king right now. And then in the West, I think it's kind of a battle between LSU and Alabama. It was pretty split all week long. Majority of the media members I talked to said they think they were going to pick LSU to win the West. And yet I think when most people got down to it and filled out their ballot, they said, you know what, the game's in Tuscaloosa. I guess I'll default to Alabama because I can't see Nick Saban having, 2 straight 2-loss seasons. So, it's just kind of interesting that, my big takeaway just being there last week was how positive everybody is. And look, there's some great quarterbacks in this league. I heard somebody say they think this is a down year for quarterbacks in the conference. I disagree. I think it's going to be a really strong year for quarterbacks. Now there's some unknowns. I think Carson Beck at Georgia is going to be one of those guys that like hits us all in the face this year and hits the scene big time. And we go, wow, we thought Stetson Bennett was a good story. Carson Beck is even better. Like, he's more talented than Stetson Bennett ever was. Bigger arm, and he's got more weapons now. He brings in Dominic Lovett, who was Missouri's leading receiver a year ago. They bring in Rara Thomas, one of Mississippi State's leading receivers a year ago, and you've got all the pieces that are already there with Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers and all that. I think Carson Beck is gonna hit the scene and be among the league leaders in passing this year. So you look at him, Joe Milton, obviously Tennessee, everybody's excited about. Jaden Daniels coming back at LSU, KJ Jefferson back at Arkansas, Devin Leary transfers from NC State into Kentucky. I just think there's a lot of good quarterbacks in this conference this year. Now, it's on a lot of them to step up and rise to the occasion, but I think they will. I think at the end of this year, we're going to look back and go, man, this was actually one of the better years of quarterbacks in the SEC.
Yeah, I noticed no Tyler Buckner or Ty Simpson or Jalen Monroe when you listed that off. And that's been my biggest thing about Alabama going into this year. And I'll be honest with you, for me, I think my prediction is LSU wins the West because I have too many questions Alabama at quarterback and wide receiver. Wide receiver is another thing I have questions with. But Nick, you talked about positive and optimistic. Nick Saban kind of seemed to, like, sometimes with these things feel like Nick Saban's got a point to get across. It didn't really feel like that when he spoke to the media last week on Wednesday. What did you make of Nick Saban at media days?
I think like he feels good about his group. Like he's got a good team. Let's be real. Like they've still, as much as you want to talk about Georgia, and, remember 2 years ago, all the stink A&M signed the best recruiting class and all this. Nick Saban's been right there, and he just had one of his best recruiting classes he's ever signed. And so there's a lot of 4- and 5-star talent up and down the roster. It's just all about it clicking. Like, you could convince me right now, and I was thinking about this, when I was filling out the ballot, like, yeah, Alabama's got some quarterback questions right now. I know a lot of people are picking Texas to beat Alabama in week 2. I know they got to go into Tuscaloosa and do it, but Quinn Ewers, frankly, before he got hurt in that game last year, it was looking like Texas was going to give Alabama everything they could handle, and they needed a miracle run from Bryce Young in the final minute of that game to pull that game out last year. I think even if Alabama loses to Texas in week 2, everybody's going to dismiss them and all that, but what's going to happen? They're going to develop chemistry. This team's going to get better as the year goes along, and by the time we get to November and they play host to LSU, who knows what LSU looks like at that point? They could have a bunch of injuries, and maybe Alabama's riding high and they've got everything figured out. So many people I talk to are high on Jace McClellan at running back. They think he's going to be one of the best. And then, of course, Justice Haynes, the true freshman coming in, really turned some heads in the spring. And so people are excited about that. It sounds like Tommy Rees is going to get back to the ground and pound dominant run game that we're so used to Alabama doing. One of the most fascinating stats last year was Alabama, when they ran the ball, were very effective. Just Bill O'Brien didn't call a ton of run plays because they had Bryce Young at the helm and they wanted to put the Heisman Trophy winners, passing on display and all that. I honestly thought the offensive line wasn't very good for Alabama last year. They've made some adjustments. They've added some pieces. I think this group is ready to go this year. And obviously J.C. Latham is the big guy that anchors the bunch. I think the the offensive line, if they can be bulldozers and pushing people back and that run game's going. And then on the flip side, Kevin Steele's got that defense aggressive. I interviewed Dallas Turner last week. I said, it looked like you guys were more aggressive in the spring. At least in the spring game, we were seeing more of those exotic blitzes of safeties coming into the box, corners coming off the edge, that we become so accustomed to with Nick Saban-led Alabama defenses. And he said, yeah, we kind of had that a little bit. We have a chip on our shoulder, and, we want to show everybody we can be that aggressive attacking style of defense again. And so if Alabama does that, if they're the ground and pound offense and the defense is aggressive and blitzing and in people's face all the time, I don't know if what the quarterback does is going to matter much. And that reminds me of those Bama teams from a decade ago where, it was plug and play. Whoever is, is it Blake Sims or is it Jacob Coker, whoever, just go in there and don't mess it up. That's where I think, a Milroe or a Buckner or Simpson, it doesn't matter how, good you are. Just go in there and do the job and let's get the win. All that said, whoever does win the job, and I've watched a little Buckner. I don't, it doesn't excite me a whole bunch, but Jalen Milroe is like, his running ability is ridiculous. I even think if he's not the starting quarterback, I feel like they have to have some kind of packages for him, maybe at least in the red zone, put him in as a runner because he's ridiculous as a runner. Make those defenses have to respect him. His arm's decent enough. But talking with Greg McElroy and some others last week, they think that Ty Simpson right now is in the driver's seat. And again, Ty Simpson made some nice throws in the spring game. He made some bad ones. It was a mixed bag. But I think at the end of the day, whoever wins that job, let's not act like it's going to be A.J. Swan at Vandy. Like, whoever wins that job is going to be a really good quarterback. And, even if they're just middle of the pack in the SEC this year, are going to be very productive and win a lot of games here in Alabama this year. So, yeah, that was kind of just my thought is, LSU has a lot of the questions answered coming into the season, and that's why I think a lot of people are picking them to win the West. But by the time we get to that game in November, if Alabama's answered all those questions and they can win that game at home, they're in the driver's seat to win the SEC West. It's almost like LSU last year, right? When LSU won that game against Bama, they were in the driver's seat. They slipped up and lost to Texas A&M a few weeks later, and it didn't matter. They already had the head-to-head with Bama. And so that's where I look at that game and say, yeah, Nick Saban, is he going to go undefeated this year? No. Bama's not going to go undefeated. They're going to lose a game, maybe two, but all depends on what those losses are. If they lose to Tennessee, if they lose to Texas early in the year, and let's say they lose to Tennessee again. I know no Bama fan wants to even envision that, but let's just say those are their two losses, but they beat LSU. Guess what? Bama's going to the SEC championship to play likely Georgia, and if they win that game, Bama's back in the playoff again with two losses. It'd be the first two-loss team to make the playoff this year. So anyway, that's just kind of my general thought on Bama. Like, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. It's not as great. It's not sunshine and roses. It's not undefeated season, but I'm also not burying them like a lot of people are right now.
Yeah, which Lane Kiffin talked about that. Paul Feinbaum does that every year and then makes them mad. And the rest of the coaches are like, thanks, Paul. Thanks for making them mad. Okay, in a joking sense, though, but I do want to ask you about Lane Kiffin. So that was one of the funnier things at the end of his with the doppelganger, the guy that asked if, he thinks he looked like him. And so, Chris, I'm going to tell you a little thing about that. That reporter is from down here where I'm at, Nick Brooks, and that has happened. But overall with Lane Kiffin, like you talked about earlier, the disaster, talking about transfer portal and all those stuff. But it seemed like Lane too also was coming in with the comedy side of it at media days.
Yeah, it's funny. He's got such a great personality. Yet when he gets on these big stages in front of microphones, he kind of clamps up a little. Like, if you compare Lane in person behind a microphone versus Lane on social media, he's so much more outspoken and taking shots at people and all this kind of stuff. I wish we could get more of Twitter Lane, in press conferences and stuff. Because, look, he could go to SEC media days and be the modern day Spurrier if he really wanted. You can't spell citrus without UT. Like, he could take jabs like that all day at other teams. The problem is, I think he realizes there's a ceiling at Ole Miss. Like, unfortunately, like, the best I think Lane will ever do at Ole Miss, and if he stays there for years to come, is maybe he does what Tennessee just did. You get to a 10-win season where you go to a New Year's Six bowl and, and we saw that a couple years ago, right? He went to the Sugar Bowl and did that. I just think that that's like the ceiling. I don't know if he could ever play for a championship. Now, the playoff expanding maybe does change that, but I think that's why Lane's got the wandering eye. I think that's why he flirted with Auburn so heavily this offseason. And honestly, it's just like, what's the next big thing to come along? Like, let's say Ryan Day loses to Michigan again and Ohio State decides to can him in a year. You don't think Lane's going to be throwing his name in a hat there? There's been long rumors that, once Saban does retire, that Lane wants to throw his name in the hat for the Alabama gig. I've heard some people say maybe he wouldn't. It's too much pressure. But Lane's always got that wandering eye and always looking for the next big thing, because I think he just realizes that, there's a ceiling at Ole Miss that you can be good, but winning a national championship, it just doesn't seem doable, at least with the resources he has. Now, he did a great job of getting a lot of Ole Miss boosters to open up their checkbooks and write money and improve the NIL and all that. And he's done a great job of recruiting, but I just wonder, is he ever going to settle in there? Is he ever going to be, because Ole Miss fans are split. A lot of them that I talked to after the bowl game in Houston, they were kind of like, yeah, look, Lane's our guy. He's committed. Let's lock in. And there were others who were like, no, he lost me with this whole flirting with Auburn thing. And, the reporter that put it out there, it's done deal. Lane Kiffin's going to Auburn. I don't know if it was a done deal, but I do think they were pretty far down the road in discussions of him going to Auburn, and whatever happened, happened where he didn't leave. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because I think he's got a great roster. I mean, Quinshon Judkins is a stud. Whoever wins the quarterback job, it sounds like it's going to be Jackson Dart at this point. I don't know why Spencer Sanders even went there, because I've been told Walker Howard is going to be the backup no matter what happens this year. They got some good receivers like they always do. The defense has a lot of work to do. Pete Golding's going to have his work cut out for him this year. They're doing a good job recruiting. Once they get the kids in the 2024 class in, I think he'll really start to be able to build his system how he wants it. So you got to give the defense a pass this year. But, I think it's a little over-exaggerated, Lane's comments, though, on, saying that college football is a disaster right now. I don't think it is. I mean, the people who are saying that are the ones who are losing maybe recruits to other schools, or losing guys to the transfer portal or whatever. But Lane's done his own, good work in acquiring guys via the transfer portal. So I don't think it's a disaster. There were some things to clean up. It's not perfect, but how many instances of the transfer portal not working have we had? How many instances of, there's been a couple of guarantees to kids for NIL that didn't come through, but those are few and far between. There's a lot more kids that have taken advantage and gotten paid and are doing great with it. I had somebody tell me the other day, so how many complaints have you heard really from kids saying, man, NIL sucks? Barely any of them. They're all enjoying being able to make a little money. Now, again, we can get into it on the 5-star recruiter who was guaranteed $7 million and didn't get it or whatever. Yeah, those are the extremes. But I took Greg Sankey to task on that. He was saying, oh yeah, I have kids come to me all the time and say, we got to fix this. I'm like, bull. I doubt there are any current SEC football players going to Greg Sankey and going, Commissioner, this is crazy. My teammate made $1 million in NIL. This is craziness. We need to end this. Like, no kid is saying that. That's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. He don't say it anywhere. I know if I was 18, 20-year-old back then, if someone was asking me, giving me money like that, I said I wouldn't be complaining about it, but not one bit. Real quick, if you don't mind, I got one more question for you. I'll let you go. No, we've gone a few minutes over than what I told you. Just the SEC East. We didn't really get into them much there. Obviously, Georgia's the favorite, and Tennessee coming in at second. Do you see anybody else in the East that maybe potentially could give Georgia some trouble, or do you think it's just kind of going to be like a cakewalk on that side?
Tennessee's interesting because they get them at home late in the year, Georgia, that is. So, look, a lot of people are very high on Joe Milton. I was at the Manning Passing Academy a few weeks ago. I saw Milton firsthand. He can chuck it 80 yards just by flicking his wrist. I mean, it's ridiculous, the arm he has. The big gripe on him has been touch. He needs more touch. We saw in the Vanderbilt game and then the bowl game against Clemson that it looks like he's worked on that with Josh Heupel. And so if he spent all this offseason working on that, he could throw an accurate ball, put some touch on it. He's going to be just fine there. And, people will be saying Hendon Hooker who? Okay, Joe Milton just picked up right where Hendon Hooker left off, and they're going to be fine. Love their receivers, love their running backs. Defense, I think, still needs to get a little bit better on that side of the ball, and Josh Heupel has said as much. But I think Tennessee is that team that could surprise. In fact, somebody I talked to last week said, yeah, everybody's picking, Georgia and Alabama. I've got Tennessee and LSU in Atlanta. I said, sign me up for that. I'm for anything different from what, the same damn thing we've seen every other year, it feels like. But Tennessee's definitely the one to watch. The other one in my mind is Kentucky. They've done a fantastic job of recruiting. They hit the transfer portal. He loses, Mark Stoops loses Will Levis at quarterback and Chris Rodriguez at running back. He replaces him with Devin Leary, the top quarterback who in the transfer portal everybody wanted out of NC State. And then they go get Ray Davis, the running back from Vanderbilt, which you say, oh, running back from Vanderbilt, who cares? But he was the top 5 rusher in the SEC last year. He was very productive. Combine that with the receiving core of Tavion Robinson coming back with their 2 dynamic freshmen a year ago in Berrien Brown and Dane Key. I think Kentucky's got one of the best receiving cores in the SEC this year. Offensive line, they've retooled it a little bit, brought in some pieces. The left tackle, Marquez Cox, came over from Northern Illinois. He's still got Eli Cox there. Like, they got some real good pieces on that offensive line. If the defense is going to be good, J.J. Weaver's back for his 5th year. I think Kentucky could be that team that makes some noise. Now, I think they got to go to Athens, so a little bit tougher. But go look at the last 3 years, what that Kentucky defense has done to Georgia's offense. Georgia's been lighting up everybody except Kentucky. Kentucky's defense has done a great job of forcing Georgia to settle for field goals rather than touchdowns in the last couple of matchups. Now, again, Kentucky's got to answer on the other side. Their offense hasn't done much of anything. But, if you go back and look at Georgia last year, one of the few teams that gave them a tough test, Missouri and Kentucky. Kentucky's defense really stymied Georgia's offense in that game. And so, again, outside shot, I don't know if I'm going to pick Kentucky to go in Athens and win, but they can give them a game. And who knows, get a lucky break, a pick six, a fumble here or there, and maybe Kentucky can win that game and maybe put themselves in the mix. And then the other one I'll just throw in there is South Carolina. Look, I still have major questions about their offensive line, but you have Spencer Rattler back. You have Juice Wells back at receiver. Nicholas Harbor, I'm told, is that's the kid you got to watch. There's a top 20 recruit, ended up at South Carolina. It sounds like they're going to play him a little at tight end, maybe line up at wideout, move him around. He's a weapon. If they can protect Spencer Rattler like they did later in the season last year, because he got killed right out of the gates last year. I was watching South Carolina. I'm like, oh, my God, somebody protect Spencer Rattler. He's getting murdered out there.
Yeah, he was.
Season, that Tennessee game, the Clemson game, and then even the bowl game against Notre Dame, they did a better job of protecting him. And what did we see? Upset wins over Tennessee, over Clemson, and they nearly pulled it out over Notre Dame in the bowl game. South Carolina is just that danger team, and Shane Beamer's done a great job of recruiting there. So just a team to watch there. And then lastly, I'll give you Florida over-under win total. I saw in Vegas last week was 5.5. Please take the over. If Billy Napier can't win 6 games at Florida, we got bigger problems in the swamp. You are a proud Florida Gators program that was winning championships under Spurrier and Urban Meyer. If you can't get to 6-6, then you don't deserve to play football in the swamp. Find a way to 6 wins. I think Florida gets there. They're recruiting great. Billy Napier's done a great job. That 2024 recruiting class, I think, is already in the top 10. Got some big-time recruits in that group. But, they're not going to compete for the East this year, but I think they get to at least 6, maybe even 7 wins.
You're right. Florida, you should be able to do better than that. And, like I said, if they can't, there's problems there in games. Well, but no mention of Vanderbilt. I see. I even know that with their 5.
I had somebody tell me, a guy I know who coaches at Vanderbilt told me a couple weeks ago that AJ Swan has some glimpses of Jay Cutler in him. I said, well, dude, if he's Jay Cutler, then you guys better get to a bowl game this year. So,
yeah.
Look, they pulled off the upsets over Florida and Kentucky last year. Who knows? Can they get to 6 wins? Their schedule sets up very nice for them right out of the gates. With all their non-conference games, I think they get Wake Forest. But if they can win those, all you got to do, if you can go 4-0 your non-conference, all you got to do is find 2 conference games again, which you just did last year, and that'll get you just 6-6. And if that happens, we may be talking about every team in the SEC becoming bowl eligible this year. So we'll see.
That'd be cool to see. I always like it when the SEC gets all the teams in the bowls. And Chris, this has been fun having you on. I told you, Jordy, we went a little bit over that, but appreciate you taking the time. Where can people check you out, and where can they listen or watch Locked On SEC?
Yeah, Locked On SEC, wherever you get your podcasts. We got the video version up at YouTube now. We still got so much content we got from SEC Media Days. We'll still be cranking some of that out this week and next week with guests like Cole Kubelik, Jordan Rogers, Alyssa Lang, Dari Noka, Tony Barnhart, Mr. College Football, and our conversation with Greg Sankey, I think we're running tomorrow. So check that out, Locked on SEC.
All right, go check it out. And once again, Chris, I appreciate the time, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Yeah, man, anytime.
Hey, joining me next up on the Weekend Blitz, we're talking National Football League, starting in division by division previews each week, a different division, doing the AFC East this week on the show. And joining me, as I always do when I want to talk AFC East, I reached out to Matt Barbato. You check him out at the Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros. And Matt, it's good to talk to you. I know when we do this, it means it's getting close to football season. It's always good to talk to you.
I know, Phillip. It's great to talk to you, too. I feel like whenever I go on your show, it's like a milestone. I feel like we do like the preseason preview of a division, and then we kind of check back in during the middle of the season. And then before you know it, it's like the Super Bowl and we're doing a preview. So I appreciate you having me back on. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we will have some interesting conversation on some of these teams, obviously. I think the Jets conversation will be a fun one. I'm just going to say people that know me know where my allegiance lies when it comes to NFL, and, of course, you as well with your favorite team. So that's kind of like that'll be a crossover segment there on this conversation when we get to the Jets. But the AFC East overall, and I look at the division's better now than it was last year. I think it's got a whole lot more competitive. Just, overall, what are your thoughts on the AFC East going into the season? I think it's a division that could definitely get three teams in the playoffs. In fact, it almost did with New England and the Jets sort of puttering out at the end of the season. But, yeah, the division is really, really strong from top to bottom. I mean, Buffalo is obviously the team to beat. They are the most complete team in the division. Teams like Miami and the Jets are upstart teams, and I know we'll get to the Dolphins and the unfortunate injury to Jalen Ramsey, but both of those teams have really, really high ceilings. And then your cellar dweller is New England, who, it's Bill Belichick. They're still going to be a pain to play against every week. They're not going to be an easy win. I'm not a huge believer in a lot of their talent, but I mean, it's still Bill Belichick. It's still going to be a good defense, and that's your fourth place team most likely. So this division's pretty loaded. I think I think the AFC North is really good. Obviously, the NFC East is pretty talented, but I don't know, man. I think by the end of the year, the AFC East could have could be the best division in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, very possible. Like you said, to get three playoff teams out of this division when you just look at the quarterbacks in the division. And start at the top. And for everybody out there, just so nobody believes any bias, we're going in alphabetical order talking about these teams. So you don't get an idea, especially where Matt's going to lean on all this stuff until we get to the very end of the conversation. We get to our four. But the Buffalo Bills, and with 13-3 last year, last year they were my preseason Super Bowl pick. I thought, okay, this is the year. Josh Allen, one of the best players in the league. They have all the parts around. They went and got Von Miller. Everything seemed to be like, okay, they're going to want revenge. What happened against Kansas City in the playoffs, almost beating them, all that good stuff. I thought Buffalo, but then they obviously saw what happened to them against Cincinnati. Matt, when you look at Buffalo, maybe not much as Josh Allen, but I feel like there's got to be a lot of pressure on Sean McDermott to get this team over the hump this season.
Yeah, I agree. That seems to be the issue with the Bills. I mean, you look at them from this year to last year, not a whole lot's changed. They're still a really good team. They have a really good quarterback. The defense is loaded at all three levels. They have everything. They have everything to be a Super Bowl contender. And, yeah, like you said, last year, I think a lot of people went into the year kind of thinking the Bills were going to avenge that collapse to the Chiefs in the divisional round in 2021. And then here you are, they're getting beat by the Bengals at home, and sometimes I just wonder if they're just one of those teams that just always comes close and never quite gets there, because it seems like every year there's always something in their way. In 21, it was the Chiefs coming back with 13 seconds. Last year they played in tough conditions against a Bengals pass rush that was all over Josh Allen and contained him, and it's just like, I don't know, it seems like they have everything. That's what's so amazing. Like if I'm pointing out a team to win the Super Bowl, Buffalo's probably one of my first two or three teams that I would choose from. But it just seems like every year something gets in their way. Maybe this is the year that changes, but I also wonder sometimes if Buffalo needs to sort of abandon that high octane, not abandon, but maybe lean towards the rushing game a little bit more and not rely so much on Josh Allen and his arm, given where they play. I mean, they can play playoff games in blizzards, and it's so hard to score. I think they need to change the way they play in crunch time. I think they need to become a better team on the ground. I'm not saying Josh Allen should only throw the ball 20 times a game in the postseason, but they need to sort of become a more balanced offense in crunch time. And I think they're also sort of lacking that pass rush. You know, they finished middle of the pack last year with 40 sacks. I think that's maybe what they're missing to make it to that elite level and break through and get to the Super Bowl is a pass rush that can win you games in the postseason when maybe the offense isn't having as good of a day.
Yeah, and I agree with you on both fronts. The running game, I think we've talked about the Bills before. That's kind of something that they've got capable running backs there. James Cook, obviously the brother of Dalvin Cook. Damian Harris, they brought in from New England, has played well. He's a guy you can bring in. He can get you some good carries and some good production out of him. But also, you know, the pass rush. And last year, I thought first half of the year, Von Miller, I mean, this guy, he's not as good as he was when Denver won the Super Bowl, but he's still a really good player getting to the quarterback. I think he had 8 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 12 quarterback hits, and then he got injured. And then I really felt like when he got hurt, their pass rush went away.
Yeah, definitely. No, it seemed like it was overly dependent on him. They've drafted players at that position. They've drafted edge rushers, and it just seems like they can't get any of that talent developed to the point where they can sort of have a 1-2 punch on the edge. And that's what I think holds them back a little bit. They need to find a way to, when it matters, get to guys like Mahomes, you know, create those, long down and distances with a good pass rush. That seems to be sort of the missing element. Now, again, Von Miller gets hurt last year. If he doesn't get hurt, maybe the Bills go all the way. Again, it seems like there's like one thing every year that just kind of stops Buffalo from reaching that plateau and that ceiling. But maybe this year with a healthy Miller, the pass rush gets better towards the postseason. But, you know, other than that and maybe a little bit more reliance on the run game, this team is outstanding. I mean, it's well coached. It's got everything you could ask for in a Super Bowl contender. Maybe they just need some good weather luck in Buffalo if they get home field advantage and, you know, some healthy injury luck. So that seems to be what they're missing. It's just getting through, breaking through that expectation and that pressure.
Yeah, and moving on to Miami Dolphins, and honestly, when I originally was going over these teams, kind of doing my prep work for our conversation, I was looking at the Dolphins. And you know what? I might be leaning Dolphins, but the injury, which we'll get to that in a second about with Jalen Ramsey, but I think any conversation around the Dolphins, it all hinges on the health of Tua. Can he stay healthy? Because Matt, anytime we see him get hit and his head hits the ground, we're all going to kind of gasp for air because we're like, okay, is he going to get up? Because just what happened last year with him. And I think when they played the Packers on Christmas Day last year, so I think it was obvious he must have got hit on his head. And he was throwing interceptions right to the Packer defenders. There was no Miami players in the area where he was throwing it. But, I mean, is that how it is for you? Is it just kind of all this hinges on Tua and can he stay healthy?
Yeah, I think, that's huge. I mean, if you look across the NFL and go, what team can go 12-5 or 5-12? I think it's the Miami Dolphins. They have just such a wide range of outcome possibilities because of Tua and because of we'll get to Ramsey, but that's a huge loss for that defense. And yeah, I've been high on Miami entering the preseason. They're a team that I think, you know, prior to the news of yesterday, Thursday, I should say, I would have vouched for them to win the division. But yeah, it's just there's just so much that can go wrong. Now that being said, I did like the decision to bring in Mike White as the backup. And, you know, as a Jets fan, I watched a lot of Mike White last year. I don't know if he's going to be a prolific answer for the Dolphins should Tua get hurt, but at least he's competent. If they can protect him in Miami like the Jets couldn't, I think you could get probably 85% of what Tua would give you. So I do think that Mike White gives them a nice insurance policy in case Tua gets hurt. And if Tua stays healthy, I really think the sky is the limit for this offense. I'm not as high on the defense anymore now that Jalen Ramsey is hurt, and I know we'll segue to that. But, you know, this team has they could win the Super Bowl, or they could be picking 6th overall. It's just there's so many factors that come into play with this team. They're not nearly as stable as a team like Buffalo or even the Jets.
Yeah, and you brought up Mike White, and that's something a lot of teams can't say they have. Because the way practices and just teams are run now, the backup quarterback rarely gets any reps now. But now you've got a guy, Mike White was, one of 3 quarterbacks that did play last year with the Jets. He has shown some good stuff when he does. He's not a guy, obviously, he's not your franchise quarterback or a guy you want starting the entire season. But like you said, if Tua does go down for a week or 2 or he has to be out, Mike White's got to come in, because when you've got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on the outside, 2 of the fastest receivers in the NFL, it kind of helps too. I mean, so you're pretty much playing point guard. Just distribute the ball to those guys and they'll do something for you.
Right. Yeah, and in that offense, McDaniel's so good at scheming those speedsters open in Hill and Waddle. Yeah, it does. Neither Tua nor Mike White has to do a whole lot, and that's what I think the greatness of the Miami offense is, and why I'm high on them this year is it's so well designed. Again, another team that maybe needs to find a solution at running back and get that ground game going a bit more to put less pressure on Tua and maybe give him a few less dropbacks per game, but. Yeah, I mean, all the pieces are there. And as a Jets fan, I was disappointed that they couldn't retain Mike White. Now, we obviously will talk to who they acquired over the offseason, and they still have Zach Wilson there, who I guess is a competent backup now. But I was bummed that the Jets couldn't bring him back, because he's competent. And that's maybe all Miami needs. I mean, if you can just deliver the ball to Tyreek Hill in space, he can kind of do the rest for you. So, yes, the Dolphins have a low ceiling based on what happened, a low floor based on what, if Tua can stay healthy. But if Mike White has to come in, I think the Dolphins are still in an okay spot, and they're still a team I like to make the playoffs. Now, the defense is a whole other story, and I'm guessing we'll talk about that in a second, but that was my biggest concern coming into the season was can that defense take the next step?
Yeah, that's where we're at right now with the defense. Last year, they were the 18th overall ranked defense in the league, 4th against the run, but they're 27th in the pass. So then you bring in Jalen Ramsey. So, okay, that should help fix that. And then Xavier Howard last year was dealing with a lot of injuries. Big reason why he probably struggled a lot last season. We said, okay, he's coming in healthy. Jalen Ramsey's coming in. We've got 2 solid corners. Jalen Ramsey, really good corner. And now with the injury he had, knee injury, and I think I saw something that he could be out, maybe come back in December. So now you're without him most of the season. They bring in Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator, but now that kind of has to hamper things because, like I said, they were probably thinking, okay, Jalen Ramsey's coming in. We've solved that problem of our pass defense being an issue.
Right. That's exactly, as of 3 days ago, that's what I was thinking. Okay, the Dolphins have, and that was why I was high on the Dolphins. They addressed their major issues. I mean, they were 25th in pass defense DVOA last year. They're going to get Howard back and healthy, hopefully. They bring in Jalen Ramsey to be that, 1A, 1B corner alongside Howard. And then you bring in one of the best defensive coordinators in the league and Vic Fangio, and you go, okay, now we're talking. This defense could take a major leap forward. Unfortunately, with Ramsey going down, the upside for this defense does take a dip. But I am still hopeful, and I think pretty confident that Fangio is going to get some things turned around on that defense. So just by scheme alone, Miami could take a leap forward defensively, but obviously the ceiling and the potential of that defense is obviously takes a step back with no Ramsey.
So I'm going to jump into the Patriots now. And look, that was a monumental mistake Bill Belichick made last year by having Matt Patricia and Joe Judge basically being your offensive coordinators. I think Matt Jones probably shouldn't have done it, but I also kind of don't blame him for yelling at them on the sidelines constantly. Last season, I was always like, Mac, I understand why you're doing that though, but you probably don't need to do that. The last guy could do that, but that was Tom Brady. But they bring in Bill O'Brien, and you look at the Patriots, we figured they're going to be good defensively. It's got to be the offense. But, Matt, I look at their play. I mean, they went and got Juju Smith-Schuster, Devontae Parker's back a receiver. They did go sign tight end Mike Gesicki, who is probably a better fit with them than he was with the Dolphins. But, I mean, wherever Matt Jones is in his development, I just don't feel like the Patriots have – they don't have any players on their team at the skill position that teams are going to say, oh, no, I'm afraid of this player. I don't feel like they have any explosive players.
No, they really don't. They don't have any players with much upside. And they let a guy who I thought was pretty talented, Jacoby Myers, walk out the door to Vegas. So, yeah, I mean, you bring in Juju, and I don't know. I think we talked about Juju as a guy I was pretty high on from a fantasy football perspective because I thought he was going to feast with Patrick Mahomes as sort of that primary slot receiver, and it never really happened. So, I mean, if he's not going to be able to thrive with Mahomes, I don't think things are going to get any better with Mac Jones. And, yeah, it's just I love Ramondre Stevenson. I think that guy is a future stud running back in the making, but there's really a lot of boring options across the field for Mac Jones to throw to. And maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe just bringing in a competent offensive coordinator like Bill O'Brien is all this offense needs to just be league average. And if they're league average, you know, you pair that with a defense that finished third in DVOA that's coached by Bill Belichick, that's kind of rinse and repeat. You know, they're going to be one of the top 10 units in the league. Maybe that gets you 9-10 wins, and that gets you in the postseason. I think this is the year for Mac Jones. You know, I think it's a prove it year, and I don't know if New England's equipped him with the best tools for success, but it's going to have to work. And maybe just bringing in O'Brien, similar to what the Dolphins are doing with Fangio, maybe just by scheme alone, this offense takes a leap. How high of a leap that is, hard to say, probably not that high. But if they can just get to above, you know, middle of the pack in DVOA offensively, if they can sort of lean on Stevenson and maybe just have Mac Jones become a game manager, the defense will give you a shot every week. So, again, this is what I think we're all going to agree is the fourth best team in this division. They could still challenge for a wild card spot. I can't quite rule out Bill Belichick yet and his power and his dark magic or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I'm the same. It's just like I have doubts, but then okay, he's the coach, so it kind of evens out. So this is kind of like the main event of our conversation, the New York Jets, which is interesting. I feel like we've been here before. I feel like the Packers have traded a quarterback to the Jets before, and it just deja vu all over me, Matt. But the New York Jets, of course, Aaron Rodgers is now going to be the quarterback there. They were 7-10 last year, 7-4, lost 6 straight. You kind of mentioned this at the top. They were kind of in there in the playoff hunt, and then they fell off there at the end. Just your thoughts. Aaron Rodgers coming to this roster. You got good weapons. You got Garrett Wilson, tremendous receiver last year, 83 catches, over 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns. They bring in Lazard and Randall Cobb to kind of give some familiarity to Aaron Rodgers, people he's comfortable with. You look at the defense with this team. I mean, they're super talented, one of the top defenses in the league. You got Sauce Gardner at corner, defensive, rookie of the year, top guy there. They can get pressure on the quarterback. Quentin Williams up front. You got Carl Lawson, John Franklin Myers, linebacker C.J. Mosley played really well last year. They got him back. So you look at the Jets and Aaron Rodgers coming in. How are you feeling about this team? Is this team just a playoff contender? Or do you think this team got potential to kind of go beyond just getting to the postseason?
Before I answer that question, how long have we been doing this together, Phil? Are we going on like 5-6 years?
Let's see. We started doing this when I was doing the radio show, and that was in 2017.
Okay, about 6 years. I think in the 6 years since we've met and been doing this show together, this is the first time I think I've been this optimistic, if optimistic at all, about the Jets. That being said, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think people who expect this team to win the Super Bowl and pull sort of the Tom Brady to Tampa Bay repeat narrative, I stand it. It's kind of the low-hanging fruit argument. I think the expectations are too high. I think the Jets are a playoff contender in this first season. I think the expectation is to break the longest playoff drought in not just the NFL, but in professional sports. And to me, that would be a tremendous season. I mean, last year they went 7-10. It was still so much fun to watch that team, and just be relevant in the NFL in November. I mean, I can't remember the last time the Jets were relevant. It was probably the Ryan Fitzpatrick 2015 season where they were in the playoff running and late in the year. I mean, they haven't been relevant since then. And before that, it was the AFC title runs. So obviously, Aaron Rodgers raises the floor of this offense a ton. I mean, you're going from Zach Wilson, who I don't think knew how to read NFL defenses. He was a horrible decision maker, to, if nothing else, an established, highly, highly, highly competent veteran who knows where to go with the ball, who is as accurate as all heck. He will not make near the mistakes that Zach Wilson made. And that might be even selling Rodgers short. I mean, I'm kind of lowballing what I really think of him as a player. I mean, I still think he's a tremendous quarterback. I think what happened in Green Bay, and Phil, you can attest to this, I just think they didn't have the weapons. I think the loss of Devontae Adams was just a crucial loss, and expecting him to succeed with 2 rookie receivers and then whatever happened with his thumb was just too much for him to overcome. The reason I have concern about the Jets is, one, the schedule, particularly the first 6 games. Let me just read them off to you. Versus the Bills on Monday night. Then you go to Dallas. Then you host New England, who's like the boogeyman for them. Then you host Kansas City in primetime. Then you go to Denver, and then you go to you host Philadelphia. That's your first 6 games, and then you go on your bye week. I mean, people are going to be crying in the tabloids in New York if the Jets start the season 3-3. But if you ask me, that is a perfect start, because then the schedule starts to open up a bit. But you have to get through those first 6 games, and unfortunately, I think this offense is going to go through some growing pains. I mean, it's a lot of new parts. It's a new quarterback. It's a young offense. I think there's going to be some growing pains for the Jets. Not that they're going to be bad, but I think if they can start the year 3-3, that'll be a huge win. The other reason I'm concerned is the offensive line. That unit was probably what killed them the most last year. Obviously, Zach Wilson was terrible, but that offensive line was wretched. And if they drafted Joe Tippmann in the 2nd round to be their starting center, hopefully, and they hopefully get Mekhi Becton back healthy and Dwayne Brown, and maybe they can patch together even just an average unit would be a huge win. And the third, and this might surprise you, is I want to see this defense do it again. Obviously, tons of talent. I mean, all 3 levels. I mean, I think the Jets could have the deepest defensive line and edge rushers in the league. I mean, they are just stacked. I think they can go 3 deep with at some of those positions. But they played a lot of backup quarterbacks last year. I think they played like 6 or 7 backup quarterbacks or 3rd-string quarterbacks. So I want to see what they do when you're going up against Allen, Mahomes, Prescott, Jalen Hurts. Like, how do they fare against some of the, I would say, the 3 best teams in the league and the 3 best quarterbacks in the league right off the bat? So that's what I want to see, and those are the 3 reasons why I'm still wildly optimistic. And if they go 10-7, 11-6, I'll be thrilled. I'm still expecting them to make the playoffs, but if things went wrong, I think those are the 3 areas where it could happen.
On the Rodgers stuff you're talking about last year, of course, everybody knows me. I'm a Packers fan, so I watched every game they played last season. I think the thumb was an issue. He was not as accurate as he normally is. You're right. With the youth at wide receiver they had last year, especially the first half year. But I'm also going to throw that off on him because he's doing something with the Jets he did not do last year with the Packers. I think if he had been there more in training camp or played more in the preseason, made more of an effort to kind of create some connection with those rookie receivers, I think the Packers probably win a game or 2 more than they did last season, and that gets them in the playoffs. I don't think the Packers would have been a Super Bowl team last year if he had done that, but I also believe they probably could have got some more games because it took a while for the Packers to kind of get going when they found something with the rookie receivers. But he's not doing that. He's doing the opposite with the Jets, and I think that's a good sign. And so, and look, he's just got to bring energy to the team that he's there now. That is obviously. I mean, look, Zach Wilson versus Aaron Rodgers. I have a guy behind center. Like, okay, this guy. We have a guy. I have a dude at quarterback now that gives us a chance to win anytime we get on the football field.
Exactly, and that's what makes me so excited. Is I'm not even sure in my lifetime I haven't seen a quarterback even remotely close to Aaron Rodgers, who he's going to make throws and decisions that you're just not used to seeing. When I watch the Jets, I expect the quarterback to throw the ball right into the other team's hands, kind of like what Wilson did last season. You're conditioned for that. And how you go from a guy like Wilson to Aaron Rodgers, who, again, even if he's just average, elevates this team so much. I mean, just by knowledge of his offense and decision making alone, it just is. It's so much better. And as long as he stays healthy, I think this offense could be really good. I mean, Garrett Wilson's a stud. I think Breece Hall will take some time to get back, but now there are rumors that Dalvin Cook could be coming to town, and that gives you a pretty lethal 1-2 punch in the backfield once Hall is fully healthy. You know, it comes down to, can the offensive line pave the way enough? And you know, there's a lot to look forward to. It's going to be the most fun I've probably had watching the Jets in a long, long time, perhaps ever. But it's not, you know, I didn't like the whole narrative once the Jets landed Rodgers officially of, well, Super Bowl contenders. That's obviously the goal and the ambition. I think it's unrealistic in a conference that has the Chiefs, Bengals, and Bills all vying for that top spot, and teams like Baltimore who could be really good. I don't think I think it's asking a lot for them to sort of pull the Brady. I'm not sure this is going to go the route of the Russell Wilson to Denver. I don't think things will go that bad. I think they'll be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with this team. And hey, look, in 15 years, Jordan Love will be the starting quarterback for the New York Jets too. So had to do it. Had to do it.
Oh yeah, it always comes full circle.
Oh yeah, everything does. It was funny to me. But anyways, as we kind of get out of here, Matt, I have a feeling where you're going to go with 1 through 4. But how do you see the division?
I think the Bills win the division. They just have every piece you could ask for. I think it's going to be about the playoffs for them. But I think if they stay healthy, if Allen stays healthy, they're the team to beat in the AFC East. I have them first. I will flip. I originally was going to have the Dolphins, but now with the Ramsey news, I just think that's such a significant loss. I will put the Jets second at that sort of 11-6, 10-7 range. Because again, the AFC is just a gauntlet. There's really no easy games on the schedule. I think Miami finishes third. Now, whether they make the playoffs, I think depends on sort of if Ramsey comes back, and if he comes back close to where he was as that elite cornerback. But I still think they have enough of explosiveness on offense to win games, 42-35 if they have to. And then I think the Patriots could be a fourth place 8-9 team. I think the floor is really high with the defense. It's a matter of whether Mac Jones takes that leap, but they just don't have the caliber of talent that the teams ahead of them do. So I'm going Bills, Jets, Dolphins, Patriots.
All right, and actually, I agree with you 100%. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Preseason is next week. The Jets will be playing the Browns in the Hall of Fame game, but it's here. It's here. It's amazing. And then we'll fly through that. We'll get to the regular season. Well, anyways, Matt, it's always fun having you on the show. Where can everybody check you out if they want to listen, follow your work?
Yeah, so if you want to follow me, I'm at Twitter at Real Matt Barbato, and then you can follow my work on Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros.
All right, sounds good, Matt. Always appreciate the time, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
Phil, you know where to find me, man. Always happy to come on. Thank you.
All right, once again, thanks to all the guests here on this week's edition, the debut edition of the Weekend Blitz. Great conversations with all them guys, and I hope to hear from all of them sometime later on down the road. It kind of on the NFL conversation, that's kind of been some interesting stuff. Injuries. Of course, we talked about Jalen Ramsey. I think that's huge. That's a huge loss for the Dolphins, because going into my prep for that conversation, as you heard me say there with Matt, and obviously you tell the Matt conversation, that was strictly us over the phone. It was not the video like you saw the other 3 guests. But I will say this. I thought going in, maybe I was going to pick the Dolphins, but that injury changed things for me because they're secondary. And in the division you're in, going against Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen's tough. You got to be tightened up. You got to be buttoned up there and the secondary. And I kind of wonder if they're going to have the same issues. And in the back of your head, the Tua stuff. I mean, you hope he doesn't get hurt again. You really don't want that to happen. But every time he hits the ground, in the back of his head hits the ground, you're going to be like, oh, no, is he going to get up? So it's one of those things. And we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Joe Burrow getting hurt as well. Calf. We'll see how it goes. I think the Cincinnati Bengals should go sign A.J. McCarron. I know I'm not the only one to go say that, but they should. I think they should do that. But yeah, as I said there, I agree with Matt. Buffalo, Miami, the Jets, and then the Patriots. And I think 3 to 4 will make the playoffs. The Patriots won't. The other 3 will make the playoffs. So 2 of your wild card teams will come out of the AFC East. And next week we'll jump into the AFC North, which should be interesting with Baltimore, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. So looking forward to that on next week's show. And that's it. I'm gonna get out of here, guys. I know this show has been long. It's a good 2 hours plus of great football talk. And as I said, when time is needed, we will put some time into basketball. But as I said in the open of the show, with football season really upon us, coming here close, you got to pretty much dedicate these shows to mostly football, getting ready for the season coming up. Remember, guys, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. Podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out on YouTube at the Phillip Jordan Media YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for all notifications. Please leave a comment on the video, and I'll read it on a future edition of the show. And you can hit me up, once again, social media, PJordanSEC. And you can email me at sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com. Everybody has a great weekend. Have a great week. Check out my other shows, the Wiregrass High School Football Report and the Wiregrass Daily News Sports. Anyways, guys, until next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for checking this week's edition of the Weekend Blitz with Phillip Jordan. Catch a new show every Saturday on YouTube at 8 a.m. Central. Or check out the podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Connect with Phillip on social media at PJordanSEC or email sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com. We'll talk to you next week on the Weekend Blitz with Phillip Jordan.